Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on the recent content. You know, with the NBA season over, we are officially in off-season mode. We will be doing our mock draft in this episode. Only round one, though. And we will also be streaming on both days, covering the draft with special guests, Miami Heat Network. So we do hope to see you guys in there. And we do also have a comment to read from our subscriber, loyal subscriber. He's always showing love to us, Xander Cade. And he said, this might be one of the worst hirings of all time. This is in reference to our video that we put out about JJ Redick becoming the new Lakers head coach. If you didn't know, obviously that happened. And then we made a shorter video. So we're trying to pump those out as well. But yeah, I mean, that's a huge possibility. It could be one of the worst hirings of all time. I think there's a lot of people who believe that this hiring is a joke. But there's a lot of people who think that it could be a valid one. And I think, there's good reasoning and good arguments for both sides. But, at the end of the day, that's his opinion. And I think, it's definitely not like a, minority opinion. I think the majority of people are not too high on JJ Redick becoming the Lakers head coach with no experience.
Yeah, I think it's like we talked about in our previous recordings, right? Where, we know he's got a lot of basketball knowledge. It's just the question is, can he take that and actually use it to, become a coach, right? Because there's other aspects of being a good coach other than just, X's and O's and schemes, right? You also have to be able to, communicate. You have to be able to, go around all the different personalities and politics on a team, right? Like you have to communicate with the front office. You have to communicate with, your staff, your players, the team governor, whatever. So there's a lot going on. And the track record also, I think, is what people are looking at, where it's like, if you look at the list of previous guys that don't have, that just jumped into it with no head coaching experience, the list isn't great, right? Like there are some successes, right? Like Steve Kerr, obviously, right? Won multiple championships as a coach.
Yep.
Kidd seems like a success, right? NBA finals, playoff run, started off kind of rough, but got better. Also had to take time off and be an assistant. But still. And then, I guess Larry Bird was another one, right, where they went to the finals, right? So obviously you could say he did a solid job there. But then there's other ones, right, that were not so great, right? Like, say, Magic Johnson or Isaiah Thomas, right? Or, even other ones, right?
Steve Nash.
Steve Nash, right? Who started off fine and then it kind of just fell apart, right? Yep. Or, other ones, right? Because there are other ones from, like, way back in the day. But those names I don't think people think about quite as much, and obviously things were different back then, but either way, it's a gamble, right? Because like it either could work really well or it might not go all that well. But as I've continued to say, I think the roster is the most important thing first, where it doesn't really matter, not that it doesn't matter at all, but if you don't have certain players that fit everything, then there's only so much the coach can really do. Obviously, the goal is to optimize the roster and get the most out of it, but you still have to have a roster that makes sense, right? Not that last year's roster didn't make sense, but clearly, it wasn't quite as good as we thought.
Yeah.
And so part of that, could also be part of the coach stuff from last year.
Yeah. So once again, the Lakers are working through their issues as they always do in the offseason. We got through our intro, but before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so, this is it. This is the episode that you will see before the draft, right? The draft, obviously, as you know, or if you didn't know, it's going to be split up into two rounds, kind of as you mentioned, right? You got it's split up into 2 days, right? Round 1 is on Wednesday. Round 2 is on Thursday. Like you said, we're only doing one round, but this 2024 draft, it's a doozy, right? Obviously, it's a draft that has been, very polarizing, right? Because there's a lot of people that think, it's going to be the worst draft in a decade or so, right? Since the 2013 draft that had Anthony Bennett at number 1. We're in the camp where, even though there may not be generational guys, there's still going to be players that I think, will positively impact teams. And this might just be one of those drafts where, you might pick the guys that kind of fit your team, and that may end up being the quote-unquote best player available, as opposed to, like in normal years where it's like, okay, this guy, Wemby, right, is the obvious number 1 pick, right? Or say like LeBron, obvious number 1 pick. and then you kind of go from there. But it's tough, right? Because especially after you get past like 3, 4, right? Because after that, then I feel like everybody's opinions are gonna be just based off of like a bunch of random stuff, right? And there were guys that I think were more obvious picks earlier on that have since fallen, right? And then obviously there are guys that have risen. So, we'll see. But I guess we'll kick it off at number 1, right? Now, the funny thing is, I don't think this will happen.
Okay.
I think this guy goes number 2. That's
Okay.
what everybody's been saying.
Okay.
But I have Sarr at number 1.
Okay.
And I like him better than Risa Sher. I don't think Risa Sher is going to be bad. But I think as a big, runs the floor, pretty athletic, right? Got long arms. He's got some raw skill sets on offense, obviously. That's the big weakness of his, right? He kind of tries to shoot jumpers, but the jump shot's not quite developed yet, right? Doesn't really have a lot of post moves. Has some interesting skill sets where he can do dribble handoffs. He's kind of comfortable, I guess, with the ball and kind of taking it places. But I think where he mainly stands out is on the defensive end, right? He can block shots. He's got length. He knows his stuff, more so from a defensive perspective, right? That's kind of where he's further along. Kind of a skinny-ish dude as well, right? Obviously, he needs time to fill out the frame, but you kind of expect that with guys, this raw, right? Again, with the Hawks, it's an interesting situation, right? Because they do have multiple centers, right? Like they have Clint Capella, they have Onyeka Okongwu, right? But presumably, I think most people expect that Capella is going to be on the move, right? And then, like, obviously, like, Okongwu seems like he's kind of the lock right now for their starting center. But like I said, I don't think this will happen. It's just like, if I'm the Hawks, I think Sarr is the best one, of the top guys that you look at in the draft. But, like I said, I don't think he's actually going to go number 1, but that would be my pick. I think he's the best prospect of these guys available.
That's fair. And, I think this is going to be one of our funniest, if not the funniest video that we have on our channel. And it's also going to be a fun one for us. But, for me, I don't have Sarr going number 1. I have Risa Sher going number 1. And that's because of all the things that we've kind of learned about in, the past couple of days, if you want me to be honest. Like the markets have completely flipped. Like it used to be Sarr was kind of like not like a 100% lock, but a very good safe lock,
right?
To be number 1, and it's completely flipped, which is interesting. And I think it's due to the fact we've heard some crazy things, I think, coming out of Sarr's camp specifically, where it's like he won't, not crazy.
Doesn't want to go to Atlanta.
Yeah, not crazy things, but just obvious things that kind of point to the signs of, he doesn't want to be in Atlanta. Like power forward, he wants to play the 4 instead of the 5, which is interesting considering his frame and size. But back to my Risa Sher pick. I think this is a good addition. I think he is one of the guys that has a lot of potential. We know that he has knockdown shooting ability. I think the counting stats don't tell the whole story. I think if you really look at the EuroLeague film, that's kind of what sets him apart, I think, because he's a little bit farther along, I think, than a lot of the prospects coming out of the NCAA this year. And that's kind of the big contrast, is looking at the NCAA compared to what the EuroLeague does look like and stuff like that. So Risa Sher, like I said, he's got the frame, 6'9", 204, can knock down the 3. We've also seen him kind of run the floor, leak out on the break. I think he has defensive abilities as well. But I think number 1 is like the one that's kind of like up in the air the most, because people are talking about Clingan, Sarr, Risa Sher, but I'm going with Risa Sher. And I think he also fits kind of the mold of what, Atlanta should be doing. Because I think Onyeka Okongwu, I think he has a lot of potential to be the starting center, for Atlanta, going forward. And then also wing position, I think not necessarily that Atlanta's lacking in that, but I think a little bit of depth would for sure help them. You have Jalen Johnson, and then obviously if you pair him with Risa Sher and whoever the guard is going to be, whether it be Trae Young or DeJounte Murray or both of them, I think that's like a solid upgrade in terms of what you had last year. So that's why I'm going Risa Sher number 1.
Yeah. And obviously, like you said, his stock has risen a lot, right, with his play in the postseason overseas, right, where he's playing right now. I know that some people don't like some of his physicals, right? Like, even though he's 6'9", he's got kind of a shorter-ish wingspan, right? I think it's like 6'9.5". Got, 8'11" standing reach. And like you said, the threes, right, it got better over the course of his time, playing over there, right? I know he I think he shoots 40.7% off the catch, right? 35% off the dribble. Not necessarily like step backs, but more so like catching it, and then kind of like, on the move and stuff like that. So like you said, his shooting mechanics, are there for the most part, right? And I have him at 2, right? Like I said, I don't think he'll go 2. I think he goes 1. For the reasons you said. And then the thing with the Wizards is like they have a ton of wings, obviously, right? Like they have Avdia. They have Bagley's not really a wing, right? But you have like Avdia, you have Kispert, and others like that, right? I guess Johnny Davis isn't a wing, but still, you have like a lot of guys that kind of play similar positions over there. So that's where it gets kind of crowded. But obviously, like, oh yeah, and Kuzma as well. But like, obviously at the same time, it's like you're the Wizards, right? So it's like you're not necessarily saying like, oh, we can't draft this guy over here because this guy over there, is our guy long term, right?
Sure.
Like a lot of these guys may not be there long term. So, that's where I have him at 2. But like I said, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he goes 1, and I wouldn't really have a problem with it. Because I do think he's a guy that can plug and play for a lot of teams, right? Like you said, he's got some skill sets that are already there as opposed to other guys like even Asar, who's a little bit more raw. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think for the Wizards, like, it would be nice to kind of have a guy who's already ready. As well as Bilal, too. That's another wing.
Yeah.
But he can also kind of move up a position or down a position. So.
Yeah. I think the Wizards have a lot of flexibility here. And obviously, y'all know that this is my team. And I have them picking Sarr. I think this is an awesome fit. I know, a lot of people have talked about him not wanting to play the center position. Like I said, which we already talked about a little bit. And, I think the Wizards should pick him. I think he has a ton of upside. Like you talked about, the counting stats are pretty raw, pretty awful if you ask me offensively. Defensively, though, if you look at the film, the guy is a playmaker. He's a defensive playmaker. He kind of soars in and out of areas and pockets to get blocks that you kind of think are just a little bit impossible. I think he has not, to jump the gun or anything like that, but I think he has a little bit of Wemby light kind of potential where, you look at maybe like a very, very raw version of Wemby. So obviously without the jump shot, worse handles, all that stuff, way, way worse. But I think he has the potential to kind of climb to, maybe like Porzingis or something like that. In his frame, he's not like, the tallest center. He's 7'1", which is awesome. But the problem is, I don't think he knows how to use his body yet, which is kind of what you expect from a younger guy like this. But I think he has immense defensive potential, and a lot of room to grow, I think, and it would be awesome if he could develop a perimeter defense skill set where it's like, he's able to be that switcher where he's not a liability like Gobert on defense, but more of like a guy that you stay away from. Like you don't want Sarr switching onto your guard because of his ability to chase down and, follow guys to the rim or just, contest them on the perimeter. So that's kind of why I have Sarr going there. I think he has a lot of value. Obviously, I think he's going to be the best center in this draft. But I don't think you're going to see it immediately. So this is not an immediate impact player. I think this is a raw guy, definitely a project, but the potential is why I have him going number 2.
Yeah. Then at 3, I think this is where things get kind of interesting where, there's a lot of different thoughts about this. I'm going to go with Reed Sheppard from Kentucky. Obviously there's been a lot of talk about his play as a freshman, right? He shot 52% from 3, which is absolutely nuts. In a variety of different ways, right? Like, especially off the catch, he's got a good release, and things like that. And for a team like Houston, you don't have a lot of perimeter shooting, right? Like, there are guys on there that can hit threes, right? Like, say, like a Fran VanVleet, Jabari Smith, Dylan Brooks. But then there's also other guys that aren't necessarily strong three-point shooters, right? Like, I mean, even like Jalen Green got better from 3, but then it's like, Thompson, right? Not necessarily a strong, three-point shooter. Whitmore, fine, right? But still, like, you have a lot of guys that are more so streaky. Right, you don't really have a lot of guys that are just flat out like you're out here to space the floor and hit a bunch of threes. And so I think, a guy like that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, weaknesses, I know he had the 42-inch vertical, but he's still kind of a smaller guy. It's like 6'2", right? So, that can be an area where, I know he played some point, for Kentucky, but and some 2 at the same time. But I feel like in the NBA, it feels like he probably would almost have to be more like an undersized 2. where it's like, he's kind of, maybe occasionally brings up the ball and like, looks to score in some spots. He's got some smart playmaking abilities as well, but like more like a combo guard. I don't think he, I don't think he'd really want him, being like just a straight up two guard in the NBA, just because defensively might get picked on and things like that.
Yeah.
But, again, he's got some great shooting mechanics, and I think, again, a team like that really needs that.
Yeah. I also have him going third to Houston.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is I think third is probably a lock for him. I just think, like you talked about, he's the best 3-point shooter. They're going to address their needs. And I think also one thing that's underrated is his playmaking ability is awesome. Yeah. I think if you watch Kentucky basketball, you know what I'm talking about. His chemistry with Rob Dillingham was off the charts, I think, up until the tournament pretty much. But, I think also another facet of his game, which is underrated for his size, is his defense. He can be a little bit pesky, not necessarily like a stopper for sure, but, a guy that'll get you like a little annoyed and rattled. Exactly. Like where it's like, he's not going to stop. But I think the thing that people are falling in love with and have fallen in love with, obviously, is the catch and shoot jumper. It's wet. It's insane, actually. So, but the problem is, like you said, him being 6'3", 181, that's where I think there are some problems because his play style necessarily isn't a point guard. It's more of a two guard, but 6'3" is a little bit short for that. But I think he'll fit into a good system and a good wave, with Houston, because I think that's where he's going. So,
yeah. And I guess, the good news for Houston is you do have a lot of versatility at the guard spot because you have guys like, Van Vliet, right, who's also small, but he's a pretty good stout defender. You have Thompson, who can kind of play multiple spots. You have Jalen Green, right, who's a bigger, well, not big, but, a taller, more athletic guard. So you do have, like, lots of different guys you can kind of throw out there. You can fit in a lot of different lineups.
Yeah.
For the Spurs, I'm going to go with Stephon Castle. Now, again, I think after you go 3, I think this is where everything kind of just, drifts off and just kind of goes insane. I think for the Spurs, they're in an interesting spot because unlike some of these other teams, I guess, the Blazers are kind of in this spot too, but it's a little bit different. They have 2 lottery picks. But in this case, they're both top 10, right? The Blazers have 7 and 14, but the Spurs have 4 and 8. I think one of these needs to be some type of guard. Mainly just from the perspective of like, they had Jeremy Sohan playing point guard last year for a decent chunk. Then they switched to Trey Jones, which is fine. But it would be nice to have like, some other type of decent guard out there. Now he's not really like a point guard type guy necessarily. He's more again like a combo secondary, type guard. But again, he can make some extra passes. He's a pretty good athlete. And things like that. So I think he makes sense for, again, a team that just needs some type of playmaking from the guard spot. And again, like I said, I know he's not a prototypical point guard at all, but just, again, you need somebody, as long as you can throw like an entry pass, or something like that, right? Again, even like on the secondary plays, that would be nice. He's not a great 3-point shooter, or he didn't shoot very well at UConn, right? So that's obviously, a problem, but he does play smart. He can cut, off the ball. He can kind of find spots to get in, which is cool. So he's, a good athlete and can control his body well, and he can play some defense. And I think that's something that can also, help the Spurs, right? Because obviously you do have Wemby, right, who's a very good defensive guy in and of himself. But you don't necessarily have to just be like, well, we can just have like a bunch of offensive guys that don't really defend because we have Wemby. Like, get a guy that can also kind of play some defense too. So, I think, he's a guy that I think should be able to translate well. And the Spurs have a pretty decent reputation for being able to develop guys' jump shots. Like, say like a Tony Parker wasn't a great jump shooter. Even Kawhi Leonard was more so like just a corner 3-point shooter, and other guys as well. Right. So I think that's where, a team like that should be able to help. Again, they've had some weird picks at different points. Like the Josh Primo one, just, I don't know, that came out of nowhere. But I think this is a guy that can really help them.
Yeah, funny enough, this is exactly who I have going forth as well. Stephon Castle, like you pretty much hit on all the points. He's got, I think, what it takes to be like that do-it-all point guard. Not necessarily a star, but yeah, definitely like a Swiss Army knife where, he could be, your best perimeter defender, but he could also be your best playmaker as well. Because I think his potential is through the roof. I think his frame is amazing, 6'6", 210 as a point guard. I think that's kind of a recipe for success if you ask me. I think the counting stats, they don't look too great, but I think he has potential to like wreak havoc on both ends of the floor. And that's what the Spurs need. They need a playmaker. And I think a lot of people, even like people on CBS Sports, they've been talking about him as like a defensive stalwart. So, I think there is a lot of potential for this guy to be their franchise point guard. But like you said, they do have another pick, which they can address, that need with potentially. But the only thing that kind of throws me off about him is that 26% from the 3-point line during his time at UConn. That's the only thing that makes me kind of frustrated. And that's why I think, he's not going to go any higher than 4. Because I think, Houston, they wouldn't take a swing on that. I don't think the Wizards would. And I don't think the Hawks would need that as well. So that's kind of where I think he falls.
Yeah.
What's so funny?
This one, again, I don't think this is going to happen. But this guy's in an intriguing spot, right? Because he was on, the back-to-back reigning college champion UConn teams, right? And you know what I'm talking about. Talking about Donovan Clingan, right? The 7'2", 7'3" big man. If you haven't heard of him at this point, right? He makes his mark, obviously with his size, right? He can set some tough screens. He can block shots on the inside. He can rebound. Obviously very physical guy. Also has got some good touch on the inside. I wouldn't really call him like a quote-unquote scorer, right? I think in the NBA it'll be a little bit different, right? Where it's more so like maybe dump-offs, maybe some rolls to the basket, putbacks, things like that, right? I don't think you're necessarily going to ask him to post guys up. Obviously he doesn't really have a jumper, right? So you don't really want him shooting like a ton of threes. Maybe he develops it later on. The Pistons, obviously, it's a very strange spot because they don't have a lot of shooting. They already have another center. But I feel like his talent at a certain point, like I feel like, there's been talks about him even going number 1, which maybe it happens. I don't know. But I think at a certain point, like, I don't know. I feel like I don't know. I know some people think he might just fall, like if certain guys get picked. But, I think he can be a very productive player. And, with Duren, we saw him in the Summer League and, he had a good rookie year. But it still feels like in year 2, there's still, maybe not quite yet, like a spot where it's like he's completely safe, right? So I think, that's where it's like I don't feel as bad taking a guy like Clingan where it's like, okay, we already have a center. But, let's take a shot at another one and see where that goes. And then maybe, if he's really good out of the gate, maybe we are more comfortable moving on and then, bringing in somebody else. But again, it is a weird spot because they do need some shooting. But I think his talent may outweigh that.
Sure. Yeah, and it's like, I think Clingan is for sure a riser, but he could also be a faller. That's the problem with this draft. Like, it all depends on who's picked before him. But I really do like him as a prospect. This is the first time. This is the first, pick where we're completely different. So, with the 5th pick in the NBA draft, I'm taking Mataz. I think this guy is awesome. I think he's a project for sure. Coming off of G League Ignite, we've already done, a couple of videos talking about G League Ignite and, what happened to that. But I think, with the whole changing of the front office, I think they're going to look to go in a different direction potentially. I think they're going to like play it safe with Duren. Honestly, I think, it might be a little bit too early to give up on him, but I think Mataz is awesome. I think he's going to be a good like wing fit potentially. Next to Cade Cunningham, you look at his stats, 12 points per game, 3 rebounds, 1.6 assists. So the playmaking definitely needs some work, but 41% from the 3-point line in G League games. So not necessarily like winning basketball numbers or anything like that, but I think, productivity, I think it's awesome. Like he's 6'8", 209. I think he can do a lot. And I think with time, potential, development, because I think, the Detroit Pistons should be prioritizing, player development. That should be their number 1 goal right now. And I think, that would help and skyrocket that player development if they can kind of have a poster boy for that. And I think Mataz Buzelis would be an awesome pick here.
Yeah. And that's the thing where, like you said, that's another guy where, he was projected a little bit higher when people first started talking about him. He was looked at as a possible top 3 pick.
Yeah.
But since then, like you said, with the G League Ignite, stuff is just, they've just completely fallen apart.
Yeah.
So a lot of those guys have fallen since then, right? Like
Yeah.
including another guy, which will come up at some point, in our mock draft. But it is an interesting one, that's
Yeah.
for sure, right? Just because, again, like you said, from the perspective of a team like Detroit, where do they go? What's the direction, right? Because they had a very rough season. And it's strange because, they have, it feels like more talent than maybe a team like, say, the Wizards. But at the same time, like the record was just as bad, right? It will actually worse.
Worse. Yeah.
So you're just wondering, like, with the new front office, right? Presumably at a certain point, a new coach, what's the next step for them? And that's where, like, I think that could be the team that kind of surprises us with, what they end up doing.
Yeah.
Just because we don't really know, what direction they're even really looking at. But like you said, we know at the very least they're not very good and they're in the midst of a rebuild. But,
Yeah.
Again, there's a pathway where it's like, take a guy, develop him as a project, or they could be like, well, we have a little bit more talent than some of these other teams, so let's see if we take somebody else, but who knows?
Because I like their depth. Like I like their guard room.
Right.
I like,
Exactly.
I like their bigs as well. So I think the wing position is kind of where they're lacking, and who knows what they
Right.
do and pay, in free agency. That's another thing as well. But I think Mataz will be the guy that goes there.
Yeah. Then after that, the Charlotte Hornets, this is another team where it'll be kind of intriguing what they do because, they had a ton of injuries last year. So we didn't even really get to see a lot of games, with their main group of guys, right? Because obviously they had LaMelo Ball, right, who was good towards the latter part of his season. But again, the latter part of the season was like November. So that's rough. Mark Williams, right, who was great as a rookie, barely played in his second year. So, who knows, obviously. I still think he's going to be good, but he's got, he had a back issue, which obviously is an issue. And then Brandon Miller, right, the number 2 pick. I'm going to have them taking another guard. I got Devin Carter at 6. And this is another guy where
That's
I feel like his
high.
stock, I think and I think that one might be like a reach one.
Mhm.
But I think just from the perspective of Charlotte, right, you haven't really had, I mean, I know they had Terry Rozier, but I feel like it would be nice to see if you could have another backcourt mate next to LaMelo Ball that maybe kind of prioritizes doing other stuff other than just specifically scoring. I know he scored, 20 a game, for Providence in his third season, but he also had 9 rebounds a game, right? And he's 6'2", 6'3", right? So that's obviously very impressive that he could get that many rebounds, and he's not that big. Shot 38%, right, as a junior, right? So that's pretty good, right? Because you'd like to have, guys next to LaMelo who can shoot. Good athlete, solid secondary playmaker. So I think that's the type of player that would be pretty nice to have next to LaMelo Ball because I think we know LaMelo Ball isn't necessarily a strong defender. So it would be nice to have another defensive, playmaker type guy next to him, even though he's small. You don't necessarily always want your defensive guard to be the smaller guy. But LaMelo, the cool thing about him is that he's versatile enough to kind of play next to a smaller-ish guard since he's, a big point guard. So I think that's a guy that could probably, really pop for them. But, it could be a gamble, obviously. Just because, he's another guy whose stock kind of rose later on. So, if things translate and work out with the jump shot, then everything else should be able to kind of fall in place. But then obviously with like a lot of these guys, right, if the jumper doesn't work, then that's where you might have a little bit of a problem. But Charlotte does have some good shooters on that team. I mean, Ball, Miller, but still, you don't really want a guard that's not a good shooter. But he shot very well as a junior, so that should hopefully translate over.
Yeah, I agree. This is gonna get hot, I think, right here because I know normally, you don't mock trades into this thing, but I am mocking a trade. I wouldn't say like, I know exactly what's gonna be in the deal, but I think the Memphis Grizzlies will trade up to grab Donovan Clingan here from Charlotte. Which I think has a lot of potential because, you look at Memphis, they need a big man, I think, to play alongside Triple J. They no longer have Steven Adams, and I think Donovan Clingan is the perfect replacement. I think there is a world where we can kind of see Memphis throw, Charlotte not like a crazy deal, but a deal they kind of can't turn down, considering the quality of this draft. So I think they'll flip places with Charlotte and they get Donovan Clingan. And you already talked about him, the counting stats aren't insane, in terms of scoring or anything like that, but he has a lot of potential to be a solid rebounder, definitely, a defensive menace and a rim protector.
hmm And that's kind of the other factor about this draft that I think is going to be intriguing because of the fact that there may be some teams, like you mentioned, that will trade, down and then exchange with another team that wants to trade up to take a guy that they really want
Hmm.
because they might see, hey, like we can get this guy later on, so we'll just trade down. Like we mentioned with Detroit, right? Because I had Klingon taking Detroit, but there's a world where Detroit's like, hey, we have a guy that we think we could get at like, 9 or 10, like you said with the Grizzlies, and then we'll just take them there, and then you can have Klingon. So that's
Absolutely.
like you said, I think a good point. With my mock draft, I just have it factored in that no trades.
That
But
was
at
my
the
only
same
trade.
time, like
Just a
yeah,
heads up. That was my only one.
right, yeah. But like, of course, we know it can happen, and I think at least a couple will happen. I think
Yeah.
for sure. Um, Moving on to the Portland Trailblazers. I'm gonna go with Jalen Williams' brother, Cody Williams, right? Obviously, he's a little bit different from Jalen Williams, right? Because Williams is a little bit more of a power strength athleticism guy, right? Williams is a little bit, skinnier, right? But still, like, obviously, a good athlete, right? Now, the thing about him is his jump shot, as of right now, right, is still work in progress, right? With Williams, he's shot the heck out of the ball, last year. For Oklahoma City, right? Like he shot over 40%. And I know Williams shot, 40% from three, at the same time. But I don't know. Like there's some other aspects of his game, where his finishing, in terms of floaters, right? I think he had an ankle injury, if I'm not mistaken, in college, right? So I think there was some stuff going on where he started off really good, and then after the injury, stuff kind of, changed. But I do like his offensive game, right? Moves off the ball pretty well, defends very well, right? And I think if you're Portland, defense is something that would probably be nice to have because they do have a decent amount of offensive oriented guys, right? Like Simons, obviously Scoot, right? More of an offensive guy. Sharp, more of an offensive guy. So I think something like that would be very helpful, right? Obviously, again, um, like I said, he shot 41%, but he didn't take a lot of threes. So I don't necessarily know if it's like, hey, if this guy gets like a high volume of threes, is he going to shoot 40%? Or is it more so just like, okay, he took 2 threes and shot like 40%? And that's where, that's the swing piece. With like just like with a lot of these other players, right? Like if the shot works, right? Which, his shot seems like, it's a workable shot, right? It doesn't look bad. It doesn't look like it has horrible mechanics or anything like that. So if that works out, right, then that's great because then all the other stuff is in place, right? Defense, athleticism, everything else. But like I said before, if the shot doesn't work, right, then that's where his ceiling becomes lower, which I'm going to keep repeating because that's kind of the similar thing with a lot of these players.
Yeah, the waters are getting muddy. This
Yeah.
is getting very interesting because we're very different at this point.
Yep.
I've got Ron Holland going number
Okay.
7 to Portland. I think Portland is going to double down on their athletic identity. I think they're going to take Ron Holland. This guy averaged a little under 20 points in the G League Ignite team. The only problem is the guy can't shoot. And when he does, it's probably not going in. But I think there is potential for him to kind of develop a jump shot at the higher level, working with, the Portland trainers and all that stuff, obviously. But I think him being paired with, Scoot, I think that would be awesome. I think that would be a super duper intriguing pairing. Also you have Shaedon Sharpe, athlete, you have Simons, another athlete.
Yep.
So I think there is room for them to kind of grow their athletic roster. And I think that could be their identity because sometimes people don't even talk about it is, athleticism can translate into defense. And if they can turn Ron Holland into some sort of two-way star, then that's a hit, I think. But I think this is one of those drafts where you have to take that gamble. And I think Ron Holland is one of the biggest, if not the biggest gamble just because of his shooting or, lack of shooting ability.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, again, that's kind of always the intriguing thing about some of these guys where their stock was very high and then it fell because then you wonder like, okay, what if we take this guy, right? What if we take him and then we kind of turn him into something, that's even better than what maybe some people expected, which I think that makes a lot of sense because like you said, when you have the physical gifts, right? Obviously, that's a really good starting point, right? Compared to like maybe a guy who's a similar height but doesn't move as well,
Right.
things like that. For the Spurs, 8th pick, I took, I have Bazelis, right? Basically kind of for similar reasons as you. Obviously, just translate him over to the Spurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's another guy who didn't shoot very well for the G League Ignite, but he is a smart player. Can do like a lot of other things pretty well, as you already mentioned, right? He can create some shots off the dribble. Obviously, he's got some size at 6'9", so that can kind of maybe lean into some, Spurs identity going on where they have size, plus length, and maybe adding on skill on top of that if they can get those shots to work out. So I think he's a guy where I think he could, like you said, he could go, a little bit higher than that. He could be a little bit lower than that. The G League Ignite guys are always just kind of interesting just because, what happened over there. But I think he's got a lot of, nice things about him. Obviously, he's not very strong, right? So that might be a problem, right? Assuming he plays like, 4, right? But obviously they do have Sohan, so you can kind of mix and match those guys there. But I also don't think he's a finished product, right? He's only 19. So even though he shot 26% from 3, which is pretty stinky, but, I think it can get better, right? So, and if that improves, then obviously that'll be awesome, right?
Yeah.
Because then, you'll have, a lot of long, switchable athletic guys. If they take Cassell and Bucelis, and maybe they don't. Maybe they take somebody, maybe they take 2 other guys. But I think that'd be really cool if they were able to do that. Because like you mentioned with identity, I think that'd be an interesting identity to have if you're the Spurs, right? Because they weren't normally a team that kind of, had an athletic identity. It was more so just team skill, ball movement, and things like that. But I think that'd kind of be an interesting identity to have, for the next generation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you talked about Mataz, but I'm gonna take, I'm gonna butcher this guy's name, so excuse me. Tajane Saloon. This guy is very polarizing, I think. He's a French player, so that's obviously, a Wemby connection. And fun fact, both of their sisters played on the FIBA circuit, previously, so that's pretty cool as well. But this guy is a stellar shooter, and he's got a lot of length in terms of, his ability to shoot the ball and obviously cover people on the defensive end. He's 6'9", 212, 12 points per game, 3 rebounds, 1.6 assists, and a 40% three-point shooter. I think the Spurs will try and lean into an identity where they prioritize obviously ball movement, obviously Wemby, but also some knockdown shooters and some guys who can actually hit shots off of kickouts, versus Sohan, where you're looking at a guy like Devin Vassell, Saloon. I think that would be awesome if you can pair those 2 guys. And like you talked about, kind of the same things with like Mataz, where, they're both around 6'8", 6'9". So you're adding a lot of size and skill. I just think, Mataz is going to go a little bit earlier and Saloon is kind of going to be right there for the taking. So I think that's why they're going to pick them. And obviously I feel like that French connection is just something that's a little bit unmatched.
Yeah. Then at 9 for the Grizzlies, I have them taking Ron Holland. Obviously, like you mentioned, they could definitely use a big for sure, right? Because obviously, they don't have one right now. I mean, I guess you have Jaren Jackson Jr., but we know he prefers playing, the 4 over the 5.
Yes.
Even though obviously there's going to be times where he's probably going to have to play, some 5 and smaller lineups. But I think when you look at their wing spot, they don't really have a ton of great wings either, right? Like the guy that they drafted, Zaire Williams, just doesn't seem like he's really panned out. Going into the season, I think if, all their guys were healthy, I think they probably would have had Marcus Smart probably as the 3 type guy sort of, which, he can guard bigger guys, which is fine. But I think it would be nice to have an actual good athletic wing, still lean into the identity, that they're trying to build where, you have Ja, right, who's obviously a great athlete. And then you can kind of pair that on the wing with a guy like that. They were a really good defensive team, obviously, before their, injuries, right? So I think you can add on to that. Like you mentioned, 3-point shot, little stinky, right? Obviously, it's not really great. But I think, his feel for the game, I feel like it's and it seems like he, really likes, working hard and clearly wants to improve on a lot of aspects of his game. And those type of guys, I feel like can probably, I think you can give them maybe a little bit different ceiling than maybe somebody else. But I think he still would need to work on his 3-point shot. And obviously with Memphis, they haven't been a great 3-point shooting team. They shot well from 3 as a team last year, but they had a fake team last year, right? Where basically nobody played for any serious length of time. So we don't even really know, what the team next year is really going to look like. But I think it'd be nice to kind of, see if you can maybe take a gamble on a wing, because it didn't work out before. And then maybe, maybe you might be able to trade someone else on the roster for some type of center. Maybe that's not great, but, maybe it'll level out or something like that. But, again, I feel like I know his stock has fallen, but I don't know. I feel like he's still good enough where I'd be kind of surprised if he just completely fell out of the top 10. But, of course, anything can happen because we've seen it before.
Yeah. So like I said, I mocked a trade in this draft. So this is going to be Charlotte's pick for my draft.
Okay.
And I have them taking Cody Williams. I think this guy, he's special and has the potential to be special. I just think people are kind of a little wary of maybe his health concerns, obviously, a little bit of frame, obviously, as well. And he was a true freshman, so that kind of scares people away sometimes. But, the counting stats are awesome. But I know some people think he's going to be a top 5 pick, which wouldn't surprise me at all. But I just kind of have him a little bit lower. But I think he's by far like the guy who I think might have the most star potential in this draft because I think he's got all the gifts. He's got a smooth game, all that stuff. But I think Charlotte will make the move here if he does fall, which would be awesome. And, like I said, shot great as a true freshman, has the length. You already talked about it, the physical tools to be something special. So awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, I think it's going to be really interesting to see because, like you said, there's a range that some of these guys could go and some of these guys will go, like you said, top 5 maybe for him, or he could fall out of it depending on who goes where, who trades where. After that, it's the Utah Jazz, Dalton Knecht. So this is a guy, that's got a pretty versatile game, right? Like he's a good shooter, very good scorer, right? He was one of the better scorers in the college game, right? So, there's obviously always like a lot to like about those type of guys. Obviously for Utah, they've had, a decent amount of, change right over the last several years, right? Because obviously they used to have Mitchell and Gobert. Right now, they're kind of in the midst of a rebuild. Right, their guard spot is intriguing right now. Right, obviously they drafted Keontae George, but they also have some other guards like Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson. We'll see if those guys are on the move. Knecht is interesting, right? He's like 6'5", or so, but he could probably play 2-3. And again, he shot over the course of his college career. Right, he was basically for the most part 40% or better. I think he had 1 year where he shot 36%, but other than that, basically somewhere around 40, 45 as a freshman, which is nuts. But either way, right, 22 a game last year. Great size. He's got some good shot making as well, right, to go with the shooting, which I think is cool. He can also shoot off the ball, cuts and moves well. But at the same time, as I've mentioned multiple times, if you hadn't noticed, he's mainly a scorer. Right? There's other aspects of his game that he's probably got to work at. Obviously stuff like defense, which I think is probably, something where you got to figure that out. He's got decent mobility and athleticism, obviously. But at the same time, there's going to be some blow-bys. There's going to be some other aspects as well. And obviously there's different parts of defense, on ball, off the ball. I just feel like that in general is probably he's gonna need to work on, right? Which again, like scoring wise, great, but I think he's probably still gonna have to work on defense, and some other aspects as well. But I do like the upside as a shooter and scoring, of course.
Yeah. That's an interesting one because I have a guy who I'm not high on at all, but I know the NBA world is like salivating over this guy. But it's Nikola Topic. I have him going to Utah. I think Utah is going to be one of those teams that plays the long game. Just to give you guys some context on Topic, I think he's the best passer in the draft for sure. I think that's unmatched. I don't think there's anybody that, has his passing ability. The problem is, he was diagnosed earlier with a partially torn left ACL. So, very severe injury. And I think, the Utah Jazz, they'll be playing the long game, because I think people considered this guy a top 5 talent prior to the injury. Not me personally. I think he has bust written all over him. But at the end of the day, it's just my opinion. So I think, teams are going to probably play it smart, let him fall a little bit, but I think Utah will be the one that kind of swoops him up, plays the long game, because that's kind of what Utah, that kind of fits their identity and what they would want to do. They like to hold on to their assets. They like to kind of build things up. So I think they're going to, take the discount and think long term.
Yeah, it's funny. Because at number 11 with the Bulls, I had Nikola Topic as well, which
Yeah.
is funny, and again, a lot of it's for similar reasons. Obviously, two very different teams. Again, with the Bulls, it's intriguing because we have no idea what this team is going to look like next season, right? Because obviously, initially, it looked like that they may, run it back, but maybe Levine's gone. But, if you hadn't already heard by now, right, Alex Caruso, right, he was traded for Josh Giddey, right? So Josh Giddey from the Oklahoma City Thunder. They brought him in because they believe he can be a future All-Star. Potentially also, interestingly enough, Lonzo Ball replacement. There's some reporting that suggests maybe he gets traded or possibly bought out, which would be very interesting. And they also mentioned, of course, Levine might be next. Vucevic might be next. DeRozan, maybe they just let him walk and go elsewhere, right? We don't know. So obviously, for the Bulls, there's not a whole lot of for sure's going on right now. Obviously, Kobe White, right? Obviously, that's a nice one. But I do have Topic, just because again, it's just like it's another guard. And they don't have like a ton other than Kobe White. I feel like most of the other guards are fine, but not necessarily anybody where it's like this guy's a keeper for sure,
Right. And
right? Where it's like
nothing
I can
special.
see any of the other guards other than Kobe White being moved. Then like you said, he's got some good qualities, right? He's got good size, for the guard spot, right? Obviously, he's got some other playmaking skills as well.
Talk
but
about
as you
the
mentioned,
negatives. Talk about the
Yeah,
negatives.
but also there's some negatives, right? Not a great shooter. Some physicals that were very different than what was initially being reported, right? Including, stuff like his wingspan, right? Because I believe he's listed as 6'6", and I think his wingspan was listed as like 6'10" or 11 or whatever. But his wingspan is like negative, which is 6'5". Don't even know how that was even, mistaken, but that's what happened. So that kind of changes the game when you go from having really long arms to actually having a negative wingspan, right? Like, say, just for, a little bit of a reference, right? You have Desmond Bain, very good player, negative wingspan, if you haven't seen him. There's also Tyler Hero, more of a polarizing player, negative wingspan. And, Bainey's a good defender. Hero, not so much. So that doesn't necessarily mean Topic is completely cooked. But, again, not being a great shooter, combined with the weird physicals, combined with, as you mentioned, also the injuries, right? Where he's 19 or whatever, and he's already got, some significant injuries. Doesn't mean the end of the world, but it is something to think about where, again, you just long term, you do kind of wonder, right? Because we've obviously seen some guys that were able to overcome it, right? Joel Embiid, horrible injury luck, right? As a younger guy. Still has bad injury luck, but obviously he's a very good player. But then there were other guys where, unfortunately, stuff didn't work out, like Greg Oden, right? Had some knee injuries. Now, these are centers, so it's a little bit different compared to, a guard wing type guy. But there's definitely some concerns for sure, where I think it's going to be one of the more polarizing picks. But I don't think, like you said, my guess is he drops now out of the top 5. So now it won't quite look as bad as if the team picked him like he could have been 3. Right, like or something like that, right? If he was, 3 or 4, I think people would be like, "That's interesting." Maybe not 4 because it's the Spurs, but I think now with him being lower, it won't look quite as bad. Where it's like, "Oh, now you took a guy who's, a top 5 possible talent, but now it doesn't look as horrible if you mess up, the 11th pick versus 3."
Yeah, it's a topic. It's an interesting one, I think, and for some reason, I don't know why he gives me
Pun intended.
yeah, he gives me Hazonia vibes. I'm gonna just keep it. I'm gonna just keep it, short and sweet. Where it's like I don't know how to feel about him, and
Right.
I've seen things. I don't want to, harp on his character or anything, but the attitude is also another question where people are like,
Mhm.
is he actually good? Is he as good as he thinks he is? Nobody knows.
Right.
But yeah, like I think he's one of the more interesting prospects in this draft. But for me, like I said, bust. But I do have Chicago picking a guard as well. I have them picking Devin Carter. This is a guy who I think he's going to fall in this range. I think, I don't think teams are going to be looking to overdraft this guy, but I think he is the hidden gem at the guard position for this draft. Talked about in our short, he's got awesome, physicals, I think, for his size. He nailed the pre-draft process. It was awesome. So, coming off of the Big East Player of the Year season for Providence, obviously improved immensely as a shooter. He just looks, NBA ready. And I think, he could be a 3-and-D guy with playmaking. And I think that would be awesome for Chicago to have because, like you said, their guards aren't super duper versatile at the end of the day.
Right.
You've got Kobe White, who seems to be trending in the right direction. But like you also said, Chicago has kind of kickstarted and potentially kickstarted their rebuild by moving on from Caruso. So we're kind of expecting everybody else to follow suit. So I think, Devin Carter would be an awesome pickup to either play, alongside Kobe White or behind him.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, I think, like you said, a Carter, like I said, I feel like you probably are going to be closer to being right where he's probably going to be in that range, but you just never know, right? Because, like, at a certain point, there's going to be some guys that I think will be, picked higher or lower.
It happens every year.
Every year.
Yep.
Happens every year.
Yep.
Now, this next one.
Oh, boy. Oklahoma City Thunder.
Yeah, Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, honestly, I'm almost at the point where I borderline feel like they might actually end up trading it. Like, I could be wrong, but like I'm just gonna go based off of them keeping it, right?
Okay.
Like, because I don't know. Like I said, they're in an interesting spot because unlike a lot of these other teams, right? If you didn't know, they were the number 1 seed last year, right? They just made a big trade for Alex Caruso, so they're clearly gearing up to be really good. Obviously, they can do whatever they want. They could take a guy, or they could trade it to bring in some immediate help. But I'm going to go with your guy. Yes, your guy at the center spot, the 7'4" Purdue center, Zach.
The man.
Yep.
The man, the myth, the legend.
The legend. Yes, exactly. Again, this is another guy that I feel like is a very polarizing pick, right? Obviously, there's been lots of questions about does he translate to the NBA? With his size, he's a very big dude. He's 7'4", 300 pounds. A little bit different from Clingan, right? Like, he's more post inside, as opposed to like Clingan, who I feel like probably rolls, dump offs, put back, stuff like that. And that's going to be interesting, right? Because in the NBA, they don't really play in the post as much, right? Obviously it's a little bit different, right? It's more spread out, more pick and roll, stuff like that. In college, right? Obviously as a freshman, right? 9 points, 5 rebounds. But as a senior, right? 25 and 12 with over 2 blocks a game, 62 from the field, 71 from the free throw line. Obviously, again, big guy, huge, 7'4", 300 pounds, 7'10" wingspan, almost 10-foot standing reach, which I believe is, about what Rudy Gobert's is. He can play through some contact, right? I would hope so, given his size and strength. Like I already mentioned, pretty good in the post. I would think that they're going to probably also get him to screen as well. And I feel like it'd be kind of difficult for him not to be a good screener. Very good rebounder, especially offensive rebounder. Shot blocking, I feel like Clingan is probably better as a shot blocker just because I think he's more mobile. But obviously, Edey does take up a lot of space, and he's got a lot of length. But, again, he's going to be a drop guy, right? He's not a guy that you're going to ask to switch, right, or things like that. It's not going to be all that great if he's, going to be switching. But obviously, like we mentioned with Topic, and with all these other players, got to go into weaknesses, right? Not that athletic, slow guy. I guess, if he's like on the break, I guess, okay, fine, right? But, like laterally, I feel like that's a little bit, that's where it's going to be a little bit more of a struggle. Up and down, also going to be some of an issue as well. He's just not that explosive, right? Or that quick. So there's going to be some issues where if he's going against the guy that's got a little bit of, wiggle to his game, that's going to be a little bit difficult. Because we know in the NBA, the centers in the NBA are very different from the centers in college. The skill level, the development level, the athleticism. So that's going to be a problem. I don't think he'll be as good defensively in the NBA as he was in college. I think Clingan's defense will transfer more. But I think also with Oklahoma City, like, you need a big. So, why not take a huge guy? And again, with them, they're not in a spot where like they have to nail this pick like some of these other teams, because like if they fail, so what? They have a bajillion other picks, or they could trade somebody else and bring somebody in. So again, he doesn't really, what's the word I'm looking for? Like the way he plays is a lot different from how Oklahoma City clearly, has made its team into, right? It's a lot of more skill guys, right? That even their fives, right, can kind of, bring up the ball, right? Do some, handoffs and other plays like that. So it's very different. But, again, I feel like he's a guy where I don't think he will not be as good as he was in college, but I think he may be a little bit better than like maybe some of his worst, critics think he will be. But at the same time, like, it's the 12th pick. This is not like the number 2 pick, or something like that. So I have him going there. But again, I could see a world where he falls. I don't think he'll go much higher than this, though. I'd be pretty surprised if because, he was, obviously rated very high in college, but I just don't think he'll be a top 10 pick, but I could be wrong. I think he'll probably be end of lottery or maybe barely after the lottery, like, mid, late teens or something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you have him at 12. That I've not heard that one. I personally don't think he's a lottery guy, even though I think he's going to be good in the NBA. But very interesting take. For this one, Oklahoma City, I have them picking Dalton Knecht. Okay. So I think this is a solid pick for them because obviously we all know they just grabbed Caruso, awesome perimeter stud. We know that. And I think that kind of gives them a little bit of leeway to also focus on some offense. Get a guy who's a knockdown shooter, bona fide scorer, can do a lot. So 5-year college player. That's the thing about Knecht that I think people don't really acknowledge is right. I think he is very NBA ready. So I think he also has the ability to kind of transform his game into other things like you were talking about. Yes, he's going to get blown by, but I think he'll make up for it with his knockdown shooting and obviously his ability to kind of score from any range, if you want me to be honest. So I think, he's going to be NBA ready. And I think that's what Oklahoma City is going to prioritize because I think they have so many young guys that I don't think they're going to, want to add on to that because I think they're probably looking for more maturity, more internal growth. And I think adding an NBA ready guy who fits what you're trying to go for is kind of like the next step in the right direction.
Yeah. Just a quick question before we move on to the next pick.
Sure.
Do you buy any stock whatsoever into the ED 3-point shooting stuff in the draft combine? Because I personally don't.
No.
But I know that there are people that think that way because I feel like in the combine, we've seen like anybody just shoot threes.
Yeah.
And then it literally just doesn't matter. I mean, if you watch an NBA shootout, if you just go to a game, you'll see guys, everybody shoots threes. Right. But then in an actual game, that doesn't mean that all those guys are going to shoot threes, But I'm just kind of just asking because I've heard some, some buzz about like, oh, just from a lot of people like, oh, hey, maybe his 3 comes in. But it's like, I feel like that might be a little bit of a waste.
I mean, if you look at it, he's what? He played 4 years in college, right? So
right.
He wasn't doing it for 4 years. So I don't think he's going to start now, if you want me to be honest, just because of his frame and his play style. Like you were talking about, he's so dominant in the post. I don't think there's a need to kind of put him on the perimeter because I think that would end up probably hurting you more so than helping you, considering that the jump shot probably is not going to be reliable off rip. But I do not buy the draft combine jump shooting at all. I think he's going to be a stationary post guy, like you said, a roller for sure. So, yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. After that, Sacramento Kings, another interesting team, right? Obviously not in the same tier as the Thunder, but they were a team that made the playoffs the year before, right? And then missed the playoffs because they lost in the play-in. I have T-Jane Saloon, right? Which is the guy that you mentioned, obviously a little bit earlier. But again, for similar reasons with the Kings, right? They don't really have an established wing, right? Keegan Murray's there, but he's played the 4. They have Harrison Barnes, right? Who's a little bit older, right? So he's probably, if he's not on his way out, right? We've already heard that they may be looking to trade him, right? You have Fox, you have Sabonis, which is cool. You do have Monk off the bench, right? So obviously you could say that maybe the 2 spot is also open as well, right? Because Malik Monk is the 6th man, and if Herter also is moved, maybe that opens the door for, I don't know, like, are they going to start Keon Ellis? Are they going to draft another guard? So you could either go guard or wing. But I do think that, that's a team where, like, again, he can shoot. Think he'll be able to defend, right? Moves pretty well. And I think for the Kings, like, their defense was better last year than it was the year before. But I think, by adding him, you can add to your defense while not, completely destroying your offense. Like, I think he'll still help on the offensive end, as well. So that's where I have him going. But like you said, he's another guy where his stock has shot up a lot. So he could easily go higher than this. So that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So for the Kings, I've got a guy who I think his stock has plummeted in the past week or two. because people have been highlighting his weaknesses more so than his positives. But I have Rob Dillingham going to Sacramento. I know that people are probably like, what the heck is this guy talking about? Is he like crazy? But no, I think, his offense is something that people, it's jaw dropping, if you want me to be honest. I think, he's got the ability, he's got the handles, he's got the knockdown shooting, obviously, he's got the crafty layup package. The problem is the guy cannot defend anything. And I think that's why he's fallen. A lot of people considered him top 5 because of what he was able to do in the tournament. And obviously through the NCAA season, he had a lot of doubters coming out of OTE. But I think, his size, his frame being 6'1", 165 is kind of what he's been listed at around that area. And obviously that kind of translates into horrible defense, lack of attention to detail, lack of effort on defense as well. So I think that's the reason why, teams are going to be kind of like pausing and pumping the brakes on drafting this guy very high in the lottery. So I think Sacramento will do it because I think, we saw that they lacked a little bit of offense at times. Their offense was very stagnant, I think, at times, when they were missing some guys, to be fair. You have to give them credit. They were hurt towards the end of the season. But I think adding an electric scorer like Rob Dillingham will help. I think he just needs to be paired with a guy maybe like Davion Mitchell out there because there's no way he's going to be able to be out there and like be a primary ball defender because he would just get blown by and cooked. And he runs away from physicality. That's another thing. Which is a good thing for him offensively, but defensively, that's not a good look.
You're right. Well, that's actually really funny because for the Blazers, that's who I have.
Okay, that's interesting.
Like you said, it is a guy where his stock is plummeted. And like you said, mainly because of the fact that he's undersized, right? Like you said, he's not a great defender, and things like that. But I think, with the Blazers, right? Obviously, they do have a lot of guards. But I do think he's a guy where he could fit into that guard rotation. And I think that, if those guys continue to progress well, I think he could fit in there and probably find some room. I don't necessarily know if they're going to keep all those guards anyways, right? Like, obviously they could, but at the same time, any one of them could be moved. I'm not saying Scoot will, but you know what I mean, right? Like, guys who have been there a little bit longer, maybe could potentially be on the move. Obviously, they already have Brogdon as well, probably going to be moved, amongst others. But, I do think he's a guy where, even though his stock has fallen, I think he could be better than, where people have him, falling to, which is where I think, if I'm the Blazers, I'm just going to take a gamble on a guy that I think could be really good down the line, and just be like, well, we have other guards, and that might be in it, so it might be a little bit easier to bring him along than if, like you said, he's just, on his own on a team that has either no guards or guards that aren't very good. So that's where I have him going.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I have Portland taking a guard as well. I think, we're on the same wavelength in terms of what these teams want to do. It's just a matter of, who do they take. But I have Portland taking Jared McCain. I think he's a farther along prospect and more well-rounded prospect than Rob Dillingham. And I think that's why, he's going to be here and available. It's just the problem is I think Devin White is better or not Devin White, excuse me. Devin Carter is better than Jared McCain. I think Rob Dillingham offensively is better. I think Topic can be better. So that's kind of where it's you don't want to take Jared McCain too high and overdraft him. So I think him falling to 14 would be awesome. I think he's going to be, the last lottery pick. He's a big time shot maker, shot 41% from the 3-point line at Duke, 6'2", 203. But the thing that I think is most attractive about his game is it's so well-rounded. He can also rebound at 6'2". That's something that he did very well. He averaged 5 rebounds. He kind of has a way of following the ball, kind of not, comparing him to Josh Hart, but in a way where it's okay, this guy has the tenacity and the ability to crash for rebounds, just like Josh Hart. And I think, him being an offensive weapon that can shoot and hit tough shots, and be a, relentless rebounder for his size, I think that, makes him, the last lottery pick here.
So after that, like you said, now we're out of the lottery. So now we're going into a different tier of teams, obviously. Well, maybe not different, but yeah, it is kind of. So with 15 with the Miami Heat, it's another guy who I think his stock fallen as a guard.
I know who
You
this
might know
is.
who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know who this is.
Isaiah Collier.
Yep, I have him too.
I have
FYI.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And again, I'm going to assume it's for similar reasons, right? Like we know with the Heat, they struggled offensively, so they need a guy that can be a good scorer. Obviously, I know he didn't shoot great from 3, during his time at college, but that team also just, had a lot of weird stuff going on anyways.
They sucked.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, I'm willing to kind of possibly throw that out. And I think with the Heat, I think they've done a good job of being able to, develop and get the best out of some of these type of guys, right? Look at Bam, right? As amongst others, right? Obviously, because that was a guy where, he wasn't like a top 5 pick, right? And obviously, coming into the NBA, he's a lot different than, what he was in college, right? Like, because obviously, like now he's got, the playmaking, and passing to go along with defense and rebounding and everything else. So I think this could be a really good spot, for a guy like that, right? Again, do I expect him to start? No. But I think with the Heat, with Spoelstra, and their zone defense, because I think defensively, right, I know that's kind of somewhat of a weakness, sort of, but I think it's something that can get better, and I think they can kind of figure that out. So I think that's, stuff where it would make a lot of sense for him to go there.
Yeah, and I completely agree. His frame isn't, the most standoutish, but I think, he can obviously be a disruptive offensive weapon. And like you said, the concern isn't necessarily his offense, it's more so his defense and where does he fit in. But I think Miami does such a good job with all their rookies, wherever they kind of land in the draft. Yeah. That I think, it's a no-brainer that they pick him. I think he has a lot of raw potential. At one point, this guy was projected top 3. But yeah, to see him at 15 is kind of wild. And I'm glad that both of us are on the same way of thinking in terms of, I think his game could be easily polished out and definitely made more NBA ready. Because I feel like his game, if you watched him in college, you're like, this is an immature game. Like, this is not serious basketball at all. But I think in the NBA, you will see it kind of even out and look a lot better, especially if he's drafted by the Heat. I think that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think for a lot of these guys, which again is the case for a lot of drafts, fit's really important. Team's very important because you go from one team compared to another, your situation could completely change, right? Because again, if he goes to some other team where there's a lot of just random stuff going on, right? No real structure, not a whole lot of organization, not a great identity, it could be bad for him. But a team like Miami that has a lot more discipline, right? And they're going to force guys, right, to get the best of, out of them as much as they can. I think that could be good for him.
Yeah.
With the Sixers, right? Yeah. Pick 16. I don't know why that was so funny. But
I looked at who I had. Oh my god.
Yeah, Tristan da Silva.
I have him too.
Yeah, exactly. With Philly, they got Joel Embiid, as we already know. They have Tyrese Maxey, as we already know. But after that, we don't know what's going to happen after that, right? Because obviously they're a team that's going to have possibly a lot of change, given the fact that almost everybody on the team, aside from a handful of guys, is going to be a free agent. So I think for them, this is where I think you could probably try to take a wing, right? Because again, you already have a center. I mean, I guess you could take a backup center, but whatever. But I think where you are really lacking, I think, is that forward spot, right? Because say like even last year, right? Like what was it? Kelly Oubre, who's fine, right? And Tobias Harris, who's fine, but he's probably gone, right? He's probably not going to be a Sixer, right? Maybe he is, but probably not. So I think with a guy like this is another guy, 4-year college player, so should be pretty ready out of the gate, right? Got way better as a three-point shooter over the course of his time, right? Shot 27 as a freshman, 40% as a senior, right? So obviously I think, he's 6'8". So I think he's got a lot of good stuff, working for him. He's got some ball handling as well, right? He can attack a little bit, kick outs, things like that. Not super athletic. And I feel like he might be more of like a, I don't know, 3-4 type guy, more so than 4-3. We'll see. Yeah. But at the same time, he's not that quick, right? Defensively, he's kind of weird. But again, I think if you're Philly, probably makes a little bit more sense, to take a forward like this. And I my bad. I think I should have said 4-3, not 3-4. My bad. Mixed it up.
Yeah, you're good. For me, very similar reasons. I'm not as high on him, as other people are. I know a lot of people are gonna call him like the steal of the draft and stuff like that. I wouldn't necessarily go that far, but I think he fits what Philly wants to do.
Just another guy that can help.
Exactly, because I think they should be prioritizing helpful guys and NBA ready guys, not
Yes.
projects. Philly is not in the
Right.
position where they can draft a guy like maybe the Lakers did last year with JHS. Like, you don't want to
Yeah.
be in that boat. You want to be drafting a Hawkes. I'm not comparing the two right here, but you look at the narrative, it's very similar. They're both older. I think this guy is actually the oldest prospect in the draft, so that gives you a little bit of sense of how much playing time and experience and how NBA ready this guy is going to be. And he also fits the system. I think he'll be the perfect Tobias Harris replacement, because this guy can actually knock down corner threes when he's wide open. And he can do a little bit more in terms of, scoring off the cut, catch and shoot, obviously, like we just talked about. Dribble handoffs, too. That's another thing that's kind of intriguing, I guess. You look at his days at Colorado, he was able to score off of dribble handoffs as well. So, for sure, most NBA-ready guy, or one of them. And I think it's right that he falls to Philly, because they need some help.
Right. And I think, like you said, when I look at him, like, I think I agree where it's like, he'll be a player that will fit in. It's not necessarily like that he's going to be a star type of hidden gem, but just a guy who can kind of come in and contribute right away. And, which, again, that's kind of the interesting thing, with the new CBA, because we hadn't even really talked about it. We've talked about it in previous podcasts, but with the new CBA coming in, if you have a pick, especially if you're, trying to be a good team right now, it might be really helpful to draft a guy that's ready to play right now. Even if they don't necessarily help you in the postseason, worst case scenario, right, they should help you win some regular season games, which you need to do in order to get into the postseason. And it's a cheaper contract, right? Because as we know, there's going to be teams that are probably going to have to make some tough decisions in terms of who to keep and, who to let go, because they don't want to pay them, because they don't want to reach that, second apron, because it's basically a death sentence, for some of these teams, if you're not quite good enough, right? That's the tough part, because you can afford to be in the second apron if you're Boston, because clearly you're very good. But if you're in the second apron and you're Golden State, right, that's like a tier or two below, that might not be, the best scenario. But,
Sure.
we're not quite there with Golden State yet. Actually, they don't even have a pick in the,
they
in the first round. It's the Blazers pick. So that doesn't even, the second Blaze, or the first Blazers pick. So, or no, second. So it doesn't even matter.
Oh, my God.
But just bringing them up.
Yeah.
And this is another team, right, that's kind of in another similar-ish situation, right? Obviously, Philly's got the cap space. This team doesn't, but they're another team that's trying to, continue to contend, albeit with, an older pair of co-stars, and it's the Lakers. So it's kind of funny, right? Because last year, they took somebody that I don't think anybody really expected them to take. It was very much a surprise, right? They took a guy from Indiana, similar to this guy. But at the same time, it didn't necessarily pan out. He is a rookie, so we'll see. But I have Kel'el Ware. This is a guy that, he's 7 feet. He's got long arms, moves very well. So he's kind of like a prototypical modern NBA big. And he can also, he flashed some 3-point shooting in college, right?
Yeah.
So he shot 42%. It's another guy that didn't take a ton, but, you like the fact that he was even attempting them at all. And, that's probably a better starting point than maybe some of these other bigs, right, who just didn't really take threes, period. And I think for the Lakers, I think you probably would like to, grab a big in the draft, right? Because, like you said, we mentioned last year, right? Derek Lively went to Dallas, changed a lot of stuff for them. For the Lakers, you look at their center rotation last year. Obviously, AD played center, so, throw that out because he was awesome. But then after that, Christian Wood, Jackson Hayes. I know Wood played some 4, right? At times next to AD. And then obviously, but Jackson Hayes also played at the 5. It's not that those guys are terrible, but, I think Ware might be able to, have like a similar level impact, at least regular season wise, coming in. It's just a matter of, can he actually shoot? Because if he can actually shoot, right, then that's even more of a bonus. But he can still do other stuff, right? He's a good athlete, so he should be able to roll, should be able to get you rebounds, block some shots. And I think that's kind of really the main thing you need. I think obviously for the Lakers, it's tough because with AD not being as good of a 3-point shooter anymore, not that he ever was, right? But now he doesn't really shoot threes, well, period. So it's a little bit tougher to put another center next to him. So if he can space the floor, that would be nice. Not something that you necessarily want to do like 30 minutes a game. But that's what I'm thinking. Obviously, there's some other pathways you can go as well, like we talked about with some of these other teams. But I think they should take a center. But, again, of course, what do they do? Because they pick somebody that we didn't expect, and they tend to do stuff that we don't really expect. So I don't really know. Even though it's my team, and I feel like I have a decent feel for what they do, it's still kind of a 50-50.
Yeah. I have them taking a big as well, but spoiler,
Right.
it's not the same big as
Right.
you. This is the guy that you talked about earlier, my
Yes.
guy, Zach
Yep.
Edey. I have the Lakers
Yes.
picking Zach Edey. I know people are like,
Yes.
what is this idiot talking about? Why is Zach Edey on the Lakers? I think the Lakers have the potential to get the most out of him. I think playing next to LeBron, in his early years, I think will be helpful. I think he will get the most out of him in the pick and roll. But like you said, the Lakers need a backup center, and I think Zach Edey, you look at the numbers, and he was a dominant player in college. The problem is people have the most questions about it is he going to translate to the NBA? I think he will. It's just not going to be as potent. Like maybe expect the numbers to be cut probably in half, which isn't bad because I think that's still going to be solid, especially for a backup big. I think he's going to be awesome. And I think, with JJ Redick being in the coaching chair, I think you're going to see him try and potentially maximize the most that you can get out of Edey. The problem is the weaknesses are kind of what turn people off. It's like this guy is just, too unathletic, all this stuff. But if he can play like, Ilgauskas in his early careers or his early career, I think, you can feel pretty good about this pick being a backup big, not saying he's going to be your franchise center, but you need some center depth. You need some help for Anthony Davis, especially in the West where we're looking at, all these teams that have multiple bigs and just a lot to deal with. And the Lakers didn't have any of that to, counter with, like you talked about the center room. So I think adding a guy like Zach Edey, will be helpful because, like I said, I think JJ Redick and LeBron can potentially get the most out of this guy.
Mm-hmm. Next up, number 18, I have them taking Jared McCain from Duke. So obviously with Orlando, not a great three-point shooting team, not a great offensive team. But I think this is a guy that could add some offensive punch, right? As you already mentioned, because you had him going earlier, shot 41% from three in college. He can do it with a variety of ways. Very smart player. Even solid in transition as well, right? He's got some skill to his game as well, right? It's not like he's just a catch and shoot guy. He can shot fake. He can attack closeouts. So he's, again, as I already mentioned, a pretty smart player. Not a super athletic guy, but he's still like a very skilled, finisher. So that's cool. Rebounded pretty well in college. But obviously, again, there's some issues, right? He's not that big, right? 6'2", 6'3", which, for Orlando doesn't necessarily seem like it fits quite with what they want to do, considering they have, size at almost every position. And obviously, like, defensively, I think that will probably be an issue as well. But I think Orlando has the defensive versatility to where they could probably protect him, on that end, right? Because they have a lot of length, a lot of athleticism at pretty much every position. If he's next to a guy like a Jalen Suggs, right? That's a pretty good defensive guard to have next to him. And, Suggs, for what it's worth, shot very well from three last year. So I think, if you're Orlando, again, they had a lot of guards, but I think some of those guards won't necessarily be back. Maybe they bring somebody else in free agency. Obviously, they took another guard last year. I guess you could almost say two because Jet Howard basically is a guard in sort of a wing's body. But, again, like I think, you always would like to have another shooter on your team. Especially if it's like a smart guy, as well as like, again, like if you're Orlando, you don't have a lot of shooters. So he also fills a need, that you don't have to, spend a lot of money on.
Yeah, I think that's smart. And I think, that's exactly kind of why, I had Jared McCain going there. Well, not there, but, earlier in the draft.
Right.
But I have Orlando picking Jacoby Walter. This is another guard, he's a shooting guard, Baylor, 6'5", 197. I think, he showed a lot of the talent because, coming out of high school, he was, 5-star prospect, all this stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think he has, the ability to be an athletic guy, quick trigger shooter, all that stuff. So I think, he has the potential. It's just the shooting needs to get better, because I think he's got the
Yeah.
release and all that stuff, but it's just a matter of the efficiency. 34% from the 3-point line isn't amazing, but he is young, 19 years old. Track record is more of like a gunslinger, shooter, jacker, whatever you want to call it. I don't think he's a lottery pick, potential to be, but I think he falls to 18. I think that he'll just fit Orlando's identity, where they're going to need some shooting alongside their defense. So I think they'll add the shooting with Jacoby Walter.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, for the Toronto Raptors, that's who I have Jacoby Walter.
Awesome.
Basically for similar reasons, right? Obviously, Toronto's a different team, than Orlando, right? They're, in a different spot. They have different personnel, right? Like you have Scotty Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, RJ Barrett, and Emmanuel Quickley. But the two guard, the guard wing, right? The 2-3 spot feels kind of openish, maybe. Obviously, they just took Grady Dick last year. But I think with Jacoby Walter, I feel like he can kind of fulfill some other stuff, right? Obviously, like you said, doesn't shoot that amazing, but I think it could be something that, has a chance to, translate well. You can still score, right? Play without the ball, things like that. Not super athletic. But I feel like, defensively, like you said, I think that's probably something where he's going to have to work on it. But I think it can get better, right? It's obviously not where it needs to be right now. But I think, again, at 19, 6'4", 200, right? It's something that I think, it can improve.
Yeah, for sure. So for Toronto, I have Kaishawn George. I know people are like, who the heck is that? Well, let me just, enlighten you guys. He's a freshman from Miami. And yeah, his numbers, the counting stats, they don't wow you. But if you watch the games, knockdown shooter. And I think people didn't expect that coming from the true freshman and all that stuff. So he's super young, but I think Toronto kind of values guys like this. And I think this is going to be your Anunoby replacement, because it's not like he's 6'3", 6'4". He's 6'7", 209. So, him being 6'7" at the 2, I think that increases his value tremendously. And I think, Toronto will buy in on this pick for sure. It's just, there's going to be other parts of his game that are probably going to come a little bit slower, but I think, his shooting ability and ability to kind of just be there at the right time. Awesome.
Yeah. This is one where I think it's going to be different. We'll see. But for the Cavs at 20, I have Carlton, not Carlton from the Fresh Prince, but Carlton Bub Carrington.
Yeah,
right?
Bub.
Yeah. So he's a guy, right, who's kind of a, he's a guard, right? I guess lead or combo guard. But I think the cool thing about him is he's a scorer, right? And he's a guy that can score, in a variety of ways, right? Like he can score, off of screens, right? He can score off of pull-ups, right? He can shoot pretty well off the dribble as well. He even flashed, some passing and playmaking at Pittsburgh, right? 4 assists a game, which is nice, right? He can also even attack one-on-one, attack closeouts, spot up. But obviously, that's probably something that's going to have to improve a little bit. But I think it can get there. Defense, right? Obviously, that's something where, again, when you're a guy that's primarily a scorer, right? Defense is something you're going to have to work on. I think he's got some decent defensive instincts. So I think that might be what sets him apart from, maybe some other guys that just don't really, haven't developed how to play defense yet. So I think there are things he can do, on that end. I don't think he'll ever be a great defender or anything, but I think, he'll be, I think he has the potential to not be a negative one, right? Where he can be fine. Not super athletic, right? Not super quick. But I think, he's a guy where I think he kind of knows, how to, like if you watch some of the modern scores, like say like a Luka, right? Or even obviously Harden, if you go back, right? He can kind of do the thing where he can kind of play at different speeds, right? Not necessarily a guy that's going to always play super fast, right? But a guy that doesn't mind getting a little bit slow, right? Which is fine. So I think the main thing is doesn't really drive a ton, and doesn't really convert a ton there. So that's something that he'll probably have to get better at. But I do like the scoring, especially from a shot-making perspective. So I think that's something. And with the Cavs, that's another team, right, where we don't know 100% what they're going to do. Sounds like that they're probably going to give Mitchell the extension. Maybe. But even that, we don't necessarily know. And then after that, what do they do? We don't know. So, if something happens, that's something where you can kind of come in, don't necessarily know if he'll play as a rookie, maybe, but I think it's a guy that can kind of, progress over time and he'll be fine.
Yeah, Bub is actually my favorite player in this draft. I actually really like that guy. I just can't mock him a little bit higher just because I think people are a lot lower on him than others.
Right.
But, for Cleveland, I have this one is very hot. I think people are going to really have to buy into this one. But I have Johnny Furphy. People are probably like, who the heck is that? But yeah, he's the freshman from Kansas, 6'8" shooting guard. So, I think that's something that Cleveland should definitely look into. I think, you need to prioritize some length. You also need to prioritize some shooting and size. You need something because I think, we witnessed Cleveland. We've seen them flame out a couple of times postseason wise, and we've also seen in the regular season where they just didn't look too comfortable. So I think adding a guy who's, known shooter, can give you better minutes, I think, and can do more than maybe a guy like Georges Niang. I don't know. I think, Johnny Furphy can find himself a spot in the rotation. If Dean Wade can find himself a spot, I think Johnny Furphy can find a spot as well alongside Merrill. I think adding those three guys together could be like a three-headed snake of just like automatic 3-point shooting. And then obviously Furphy has a little bit more skill and size than those guys because I think he could be an easy, off the ball guy or even, take the ball and attack the rim. So I think he's going to be a developmental piece for sure. But I don't think they have a player on their roster that's kind of like, like him. So I think, add him because I think he could be your Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, because even their wings,
they're horrible, bro.
Yeah, well, like Isaac Okoro, right? Obviously,
not a fan.
He's okay, but again, they don't really have like a guy where you're like, this is our, big guard, big wing, long term.
Right.
So I like him. I have him a little bit lower.
Okay,
but
sure.
either way, I think he's like you said, a guy that could definitely help. 21, New Orleans Pelicans. Yves Missi.
Oh wow, okay.
That's who I have. Okay. Obviously, again, right at Baylor, right? 61 from the field, right? So he's got good size, 6'11", 7'2" wingspan, so that's pretty cool. I think he's got some good physical tools, right? He's a good athlete. 38.5-inch vertical, right? Which for a big man, that's 6'11" or 6'10" or whatever, that's pretty good, right? Obviously, that's a guy that could be a lob threat. It's a guy that could jump and block shots. That's a guy that could rebound and run the floor pretty well, right? Doesn't really shoot. If you kind of remember, if you watched our mock draft last year when we talked about Trace Jackson Davis, guy that doesn't shoot a lick, doesn't really take a lot of jumpers, but he can do a lot of stuff around the basket. And I think for New Orleans, we don't know what their center situation is going to be like, right? Because Valanciunas, free agent, and I don't know if he's going to be back, right? Sounds like he might be gone. So the center spot could possibly be open for New Orleans. Maybe they trade for somebody and bring him in or something like that. But I think that's a guy where, it'd be kind of interesting. Obviously, Zion's not a shooter, so that's something you might have to work around. But again, that's a team that if they make some changes in the offseason, it might be a scenario where the only not great shooters in the starting five is Zion and then the center, right? Because, assuming they move Ingram, right? You're lifting Trey Murphy into the starting five. Herb Jones shot well from three and McCollum can shoot. So that's something where I think potentially that could be pretty cool. And as a big, right, again, it's a pretty solid modern big that doesn't space the floor, right? Because, again, if it's not a guy that shoots, if he runs the floor, catches lobs, rebounds, block shots, that's pretty cool too. So I think that's where, that's my pick.
Yeah, so I'm kind of going in the complete opposite direction in terms of, play style, but it's still a big man. So I'm taking Deron Holmes here, or I'm not taking Deron Holmes, but
I got you.
I have New Orleans taking Deron Holmes here. Yeah. Dominant college player last year. He was awesome. Inside out potential, 20 points per game, 38% from the 3-point line, 8 rebounds, as a big man. Power forward, some people call him a center, but he's 6'9", 6'10", 235. I think he's got the potential to be an awesome inside out big, and I think that will completely validate moving on from Valanciunas, because I think there's no question that New Orleans goes big here. In terms of, what kind of player they want. They're going to draft either, a power forward or a center. Power forward that could play the center. That's kind of what I'm thinking that they do here. But they also could go guard too. Like, like people who are still available on my draft board. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if they pick up like Bub or something like that. And like you talked about, Eves and Missy, I think he's also in play as well. But I think it's going to be probably between those two guys on who they pick. But I feel like Deron Holmes kind of fits their situation a little bit better. It's just a matter of, is his game going to translate? Who knows? Is the 3-point shot going to translate and fall in the NBA level? Who knows? But if it does, I think that kind of puts and gives him the edge over Eves Missy.
Yeah. Phoenix, this is one, that's interesting, right? Because obviously there's, this is a team that is in a weird spot, right? Because obviously they made a big trade last year for Bradley Beal, right? And then further, made changes to the roster, right? Ayton gone, brought in Nurkic and Grayson Allen and Nasir Little, right? So there's a lot of buzz about this guy going here, in terms of as a point guard. So, yeah, you know who I'm talking about.
Yep.
Tyler Kolek.
Yes.
Right? Obviously 6'1", played for Marquette, actually played for George Mason as a freshman, but, eventually was basically a 4-year college guy.
Yep.
And if you look at the Suns, they don't have a point guard. Obviously, Devin Booker played point guard last year, and he's a very good passer, pick and roll, playmaking, double teams, that's fine. But he's not a point guard. Bradley Beal, also not a point guard. Kevin Durant, same thing. And, obviously they were not a great fourth quarter team on offense. Not really a lot of organization, not really a lot of planning, right? Where it just didn't really seem like they really knew what to do or what they were doing. So I think this is a guy where, again, he's a pretty good passer for a point guard, right? He can kind of run your offense fine, can shoot fine. He's a willing defender, but he is small. So my guess is that, probably more of like a pesky guy, more so than like an actual elite defender.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, again, if you're Phoenix, maybe you pivot and pick a different position. But my guess is point guard, because I feel like that's probably the biggest need on the roster. And again, this is a team that doesn't have a lot of flexibility, right? This is one of their only first-round picks for a very, very long time. So, and, this is also a team that's in the second apron, so they don't have a lot of flexibility to really do a whole lot. So I think this is one where I know Phoenix, historically, I think they've even mentioned it, right? Where they don't prioritize picks. They don't even really, do a whole lot of, searching in terms of who they want to pick. But this is one I feel like it would be nice if you could get it right. Because then it's a cheap guy that you could plug into the rotation, even if he doesn't play in the playoffs, that could help you win some more regular season games. So maybe you're not like a 6 seed. Maybe you could be like a 4 seed or something like that. I don't know if, maybe that doesn't happen, but I think he could help.
Yeah, I think he adds structure, and spoiler alert, he's also my pick as well.
Yep.
And, I think he's the second best distributor. Some people would call him the first, but I think Topic flashed a little bit more in terms of his, assists to turnover ratio, all that stuff. But with Kolek, I think he's awesome. His offense is not raw at all. I think it's very composed, elite distributor, like we just talked about. And he's selfless too. And I think when you're playing like that around a lot of good scorers, it's going to be fun. And I think it's like a match made in heaven, like you said. I think it's, if they don't pick him here, I think they're screwed, for this season, honestly. It's going to be a repeat of last season. So I would say, yeah, pick the senior out of Marquette.
Yeah. I agree with that. And again, like with Phoenix, you just don't have a lot of options here. Obviously not that there aren't any options, but I just feel like in terms of need, probably would make more sense, to be able to do something like that. For the Bucks, 23, this is another team where, it's kind of interesting. I don't really know, if the guy will play necessarily, but I have Kaishan George going here.
Okay.
This is another guy that can kind of do a lot of different things. And I think, he can shoot fine, right? He can make fine, handle the ball relatively fine. He can also defend relatively fine. And I think for Milwaukee, defense was not a super strong suit of theirs. It got better, right, over the course of the season, but I still don't necessarily feel like it's perfect, right? I feel like you could probably, move some guys around, bring some other guys in that could help, right? Not like a super athletic guy at all. But again, I think he's a guy where he could probably come in and, maybe make some things interesting, right? He is 20, so I don't think he'll play a ton, obviously. But I just think if you're the Bucks, it would be nice to have, some more versatile guys that aren't, just like say like Malik Beasley, right? Was fine for them last year as a 3-point shooter, but that's pretty much the extent of what he does, right? But if you have a guy like this, right, that can do a little bit more, than just shoot, I think that's something that could probably help them out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
And I'm not saying that he's going to be better than Malik Beasley as a rookie. I just mean like, these type of players I think could help them.
That makes sense. My only issue with that is I feel like he's just going to be off the board a little bit earlier just because of like you talked about, like he's an all-around guy, and that's why I had him going to Toronto. But for me, I have Bub Carrington going here. I know that's kind of crazy considering that, we just highlighted the fact that this guy, isn't the best defender in this draft at all. But you look at Milwaukee, I think they need a backup point guard. That's somewhere that they kind of struggled in a little bit. They have Pat Bev, but at the end of the day, he's not the kind of guy I think that you would kind of want running your offense at all times. But at the end of the day, it's also Doc Rivers, so that's a whole nother story. But if they do draft him, he's probably not going to play. Bub, that is. But you already talked about it. I think I thought he was a potential lottery guy, if you want me to be honest, but I think his stock just fell. And also considering like a lot of people thought he was a surprise one and done, but I think he fits the mold, and I think learning behind Dame would also help him reach his full potential if they give him that chance and that opportunity, because I feel like he could be a better backup point guard in the Milwaukee Bucks system than Patrick Beverley. Maybe play them together at the same time. That could work. But yeah, I like Bub going to Milwaukee just because I think that Dame Bub mentorship program would be pretty dope.
Now, moving on, we'll just do both of these, I guess, right? 24, 25, they're both the Knicks.
Yes.
I believe one of those is the Mavs pick.
Yep.
Right? So
It's
I'm going
24.
to assume that's 25. Oh, 24?
Yep.
Okay, 24. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, that would make sense. But anyways, yeah, so I have Ryan Dunn and Daron Holmes basically going here. I mean, again, basically like, Dunn, solid two-way guy, 6'6", right? Just another guy that you can kind of have in your rotation, right? Obviously with the Knicks, it's going to be intriguing to see what they do because they have some possible rumors going on about stuff that, may change the shape of the team, right? Maybe this pick is involved. We don't know. And then with Holmes, right? Another guy that you mentioned, right? It's another big that can do some decent things out there. Obviously, right? Not saying he's a Julius Randle replacement at all. But, for the Knicks, in terms of your big man depth, right? You got Hartenstein, who's a free agent, right? We'll see if he resigns. I think we both assume he will. Mitchell Robinson seems like he's being shopped around, so he may not be there long term. And even Randall, right, has been kind of in some rumors and whatnot. Not that they're going to trade him, but just in terms of like the big man depth, it's not, it's not safe, right? Where we don't necessarily know who their bigs are going to be, right? Like outside of that, what is it? Jericho Sims? Yeah, I don't know about that. And again, he's all right, but still. I just have him taking these two guys. I feel like these are probably like safe-ish picks, that again, probably help you out in the regular season. And help you win games, maybe postseason, we don't know. But for the Knicks, it's interesting, right? Because obviously if they run it back, their roster is going to be very expensive. So they're not going to be able to just add anybody. They're already, I believe, an over-the-cap team pretty much for the most part, right? So they're just going to have to bring these guys back and then, go from there. And I think if you can use the draft as a way to kind of add on to your rotation, I think that'll help.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in terms of Ryan Dunn, for sure. That's who I have going number 24 to the Knicks, and then 25 I have Kello Ware. Obviously, not that I'm not high on him. I just think NBA teams are probably going to let him fall over Zach Edey and some other bigs like I talked about. But yeah, I think, Ryan Dunn, I think people have already made the connection. This is Tibbs' guy. Like, he's literally Tibbs incarnate to the point where it's like defense, hustle, rebounds, everything, intangibles, all that stuff. It's just his offense is piss poor. But at the end of the day, Kello Ware, I think, is an awesome fit as well because you look at it, the writing is on the walls in terms of, Mitchell Robinson being shopped. We've gotten the rumors, I think, today, yesterday, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then Hartenstein being a free agent, that's going to be a factor as well. So New York is looking for a center, and that's what they need. They need a big, and they also need another defensive guy because I think it'll just add and further strengthen their identity, and definitely they'll be back in the play next year.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, that's the thing about the Knicks where I think if you add those type of guys, like pretty much we're looking at like wing big, right? Something along those lines. Because that's, I'm not going to say that those are the weakest areas, but like you don't necessarily have to go deep into this part, of the draft to take a guard, because they have some other ones, right? So that's pretty much like the only position where I don't really feel like you have to do a lot there. But I think, if you can kind of get some upgrades at the wing and the big spot, I think that'll probably help.
Mhm.
Now we're getting towards the latter part of the draft, right? This one, I don't really know how to feel about it, but I feel like this might be kind of a reach. But I'm gonna go with KJ Simpson for Minnesota.
Okay.
Just as another guard. Mike Conley's older, right? He's what, 37, which is, or he's gonna be 37, which is kind of a dinosaur at this point. Still a good player, right? Obviously, but long term, probably isn't gonna necessarily, play 10 more seasons, obviously. Not that this guy's going to be the starting point guard, but, for Minnesota, their backup point guard was what? Monte Morris.
Did you skip?
Right?
I think you might have skipped over the Wizards.
Oh, are you
Yeah.
serious?
Yeah, because I think we're on 26, right?
Oh, my goodness. You're right.
Yep. All good.
Holy crap.
All
wow. Well, that completely throws off my stuff.
good.
That's hilarious. Okay. Well, that's horrible.
All good.
Well, then, all right. Well, then let me just slide a guy up then. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. All right. Well, let's start over.
Sure.
All right. With the Wizards at 26, I have him taking Bronny J. No, I'm joking.
No,
I'm joking.
no.
I'm joking. Bobby Clintman.
I think I liked Bronny more. If you want me to be honest.
Yeah. It's another forward, right? To add into the lineup. But it's a versatile guy, right? He can shoot some, can defend some. He can play multiple spots in the front court, right? Like you could play him next to like a bigger center. You could play him next to another forward. And for the Wizards, right? Like probably would like to have some defensive help out there, right? Not that they don't have any, but just it wouldn't necessarily hurt, to take another guy like that. But like you said, hey, this late first round could be like a random scenario where maybe a team like just randomly takes Bronny. I'm not 100% expecting it to happen. But it could be something interesting.
Yeah. For this pick, the 26th pick in the NBA draft, the Washington Wizards select Cam Christie.
Okay.
I actually like this guy a lot. I think this is going to be Johnny Davis's replacement. All right. You're hearing it here first. This guy can actually shoot the ball, 40% shooter, pretty much 11 points per game. I think they're going to take the swing on the young developmental guy. It's a new regime.
Okay.
I think he's going to be a piece. And like I said, I think you're going to see, not probably Johnny Davis out of, Washington this season, but in the next couple of years, he will not be returning. So I think this is going to be, your replacement. And it also allows you to, give yourself some shooting leeway because who knows if Bilal's shot is going to develop this year.
Right.
We don't know if Kuz is even going to be on the roster, So you need to put some points on the board. And I think Cam Christie can help you do that. He's got a solid frame. So you love to see it.
Yeah. After that, with the Minnesota Timberwolves at 27, KJ Simpson, we'll see what happens. But obviously, as a backup point guard, I guess, for now, right? Obviously, Mike Conley's older, 37, so probably won't be playing for 10 more seasons. He can still play, but still, he is, he's kind of small, 6 feet. But, in his last year in college, he shot 43% from three, right? Averaged 1.6 steals a game, 5 assists. So I think the shooting is probably the part that really helps. And I think defensively, he played well in college. Like I said, since he's small, I don't necessarily know if that's going to 100% translate, obviously, right? With Minnesota, you do have a lot of defensive versatility out there. So that's something that I think is pretty cool. And he can kind of, shoot and score on 3 levels, because he can get to the rim fairly fine for a guy that's small. But again, I think the big question mainly is just, again, the shooting, right? Because obviously, if you look at his early years in college, pretty bad, right? 25 from 3 as a freshman, 28 from 3 as a sophomore. But then in his third year, he shot 43. So if he's closer to 40%, that's the swing spot for him where it's like he'll probably be a fine rotational player. But if he's below 30% or low 30s or something like that, get him out of here.
Yeah. For Minnesota, I think this is going to be the most controversial pick in the NBA draft.
Okay.
You've got Terrence Shannon Jr. I think a lot of people know that name and know who he is. I think he's going to Minnesota, though. Obviously,
Okay.
you know, he beat the trial, whatever, you know, whatever phrasing you want to use. But I think that kind of skyrockets his draft stock because I think people were probably a little bit concerned with the off the court stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But basketball and his game was never really in question. You look at his numbers: 23 points per game, 4 rebounds, 2 assists on 36% from the three. So, you know, I think he was very dominant, obviously. Definitely one of the best players in the Big Ten last season. So I think he's going to add depth to Minnesota because Minnesota needs some offense. Clearly, that was their struggle. You know, you need offense, you need shooting, and you need kind of a spark plug. And I think he can be that guy, you know, as long as there's no concerns off the court.
Yeah. Next up for the Nuggets, I.F. Furphy, right? That's the guy that you had, you know, that you already mentioned for Cleveland, right? You know, like solid size, 6'8", two-way guy. You know, and for the Nuggets, obviously, right? You know, their title defense season didn't really go the way that you would have probably liked it to go, right? Obviously, with the back-to-back, you know, championships, they went out in the second round. And, you know, I feel like part of it is just the bench just wasn't that great. Obviously, I know the starting fives plus minuses were pretty horrible. I think part of that was just because almost every game was a pretty decisive win or loss, I guess, whichever direction you want to look at it. But they need some bench help. Obviously, with KCP, we don't know what's going to happen, right? Obviously, he could, you know, opt out and re-sign, but he could opt out and leave if somebody gives him, you know, like 20 plus million a year. So I think it would be nice to have like another two-way guy that can kind of just go out there and probably just help. Again, like I said, I'm not saying any of these guys are going to be the game changers in a game 7 in the NBA playoffs, but just a guy that can kind of just, you know, help so that way you don't have to play every starter for Denver like 35 plus minutes a game. Because it felt like they were just kind of ran out of gas by the end of that Minnesota series. So just being able to kind of extend the bench and give them some extra help, especially if it's a guy that can play on both ends of the floor, I think could be, you know, could be intriguing.
Yeah, so I've got Eves Missy going to Denver.
Okay.
I think this is
I
a
think that's a good
solid
one
pick.
too.
Yeah, I think this is the most this is the most sensical pick I think here because you need a guy that can sub in for Jokic. You know, you need to address the non-Jokic minutes. We saw that kind of bit them in the butt a little bit. So I think, you know, adding this center depth here, you know, you already talked about it. Not a stretch at all. But, you know, he adds a little bit of defensive prowess. He can, you know, score down low. Not like a prolific scorer or anything, but if you give him the ball, he's probably just going to dunk it. 6'11". He's got the frame. So, you know, I think, you know, his athletic ability and his defense is kind of what sets him apart. So I think that's something that would complement Jokic well when he's not on the floor.
Yeah, and I think for Denver, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because again, like if you know, you need, you know, some type of additional size out there, you know, especially like you said in those second units when Jokic is off the floor, just because, like you said, it was nasty. And against certain teams, Aaron Gordon at the 5 may not necessarily be able to get it done, just because he's only one guy,
And
right?
he needs
So
to rest too.
exactly, right? So I think that's one that I think makes a decent amount of sense. For the Jazz, 29, Tyler Smith, I have as a big 4-5, I guess, right? 6'9", 225. Now, again, this is another team that's in flux, right? Because we don't know some of what they're going to do. There's multiple guys that are in trade talks, right? At different points, we've heard John Collins, we've heard Laurie Markkinen, we've even recently heard Walker Kessler, right, in trade rumors as well. So, you know, obviously they did draft, you know, another 4 right guy last year, obviously. But at the same time, right, it doesn't hurt to have like another guy, especially because this guy can play, you know, either position. 6'9" without shoes, right, 7'1" wingspan. So he can do some interesting things, right? He shot the 3 ball, right, 36% from 3, right? So that's a guy that can space the floor as a big. But, you know, he can also pop, which is cool. So he's got some nice footwork there. But I guess one of the issues is I, you know, defensively think is probably a bigger issue. Now, again, the G League Ignite guys, I don't know, right? Like, because there's a lot of weird stuff going on there. We've talked about it multiple times. We thought it was a scam, right? We said that before it even ended, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, regardless, so, you know, obviously there's, you know, it's kind of hard to sometimes factor some of that in. But also, like, he's not super strong, doesn't rebound that crazy. But, you know, Utah does have a lot of size out there, you know, at, at the front court spot. So that might be a spot where stuff like that could probably work. But obviously, he's going to have to get better, at those aspects of the game.
Yeah. So, for Utah, I've got them picking a big man as well. It's not the same one as you, but
Right.
Kyle Filipowski. Need I say any
Okay.
more? I'm kidding, but no. I think the guy, he shows a lot of promise being a stretch, and like you said, I think they do need a center, one that complements maybe Markkanen a little bit better, and I think this guy could be him. He's also a really good passer and a very good defender, so I think him having that kind of those three aspects of his game already polished and solid, I think he'll fit right in with Utah.
Yeah. Then for my last pick, 30th pick, Boston Celtics. I have Terrence Shannon Jr., right? Obviously, as you mentioned, right, you've already kind of, laid out his strengths as a scorer. And that could be a guy, obviously Boston, right, they've mainly prioritized two-way play, but it doesn't necessarily hurt to have a guy come off the bench, right, where you can just kind of just light it up for, a handful of possessions, right? Or maybe like for half a quarter or something like that, right? Like every team could always kind of use like some type of microwave guy off the bench. And I think with Boston, they do have the infrastructure, especially defensively, right, to where he's probably not going to be a complete turnstile because they have a lot of really good defenders on that team, right? They were, one of the best, the best team on both ends of the floor last season, for a reason, right? And I think he could, again, he could probably fit in there as a scorer. Obviously, again, he'll probably need to improve on defense, but I think with all the guys around there, I feel like that could happen.
Yeah, this is the funniest pick. I feel like this is the funniest pick every year
Is
in
it
the
Bronny?
draft. No, it is not Bronny.
Okay. Got it.
It's Baylor. Excuse me, I'm gonna butcher your last name, man. But Baylor Shearman.
Okay.
18 points per game, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 40% from the 3-point line. I think he just kind of fits their identity. And he was awesome in the scrimmages because people didn't even know who this guy really was. He's a senior from Creighton, 6'7", 201. But, the scrimmages were awesome for him. So I think instant value is what you're kind of looking for if you're the Celtics, and that's with any contender, honestly. You're looking for a player that's going to impact your rotation immediately, whether it be regular season or postseason. And I think this guy's going to fit right in because he's going to add to their depth. I think he's going to be a playable guy. It's not going to be like a JD Davidson where, he's a project for the Celtics more so than a win now player. So that's kind of why I'm picking him because I think his knockdown ability, it's going to fit right in with Sam Hauser. So awesome.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. So that's, that's our first round mock draft, right? Obviously, some similarities, some differences. But at the same time, again, I think you can kind of tell based off of this draft that it's one where I think a lot of teams are probably going to ideally look for the guys that fit their team the most. And then from there, that's where it could be like, that might be the best possible, the best available player for us, right? Maybe not necessarily quote unquote the best player available. But, again, like you said, a lot of impact guys that I think, could help some of these teams. And will also probably need to continue to develop, even if there's not necessarily, a ton of superstar, power behind it. But, just, I guess, we can throw out, I'll let you throw out like a couple of, guys in the second round that you feel like, might be guys that, are worthy of deserving attention. And I guess I'll add some as well, but I'll let you, go first.
Sure. My first one is Ulrich. I'm going to butcher this guy's name. Ulrich Chomche. I think that's how you say it. Yeah, this guy is very interesting. He's 18 years old and he's going to be from the NBA Africa Academy. So he's 6'11", 225. I think he has shades of maybe Serge Ibaka. His defense is aggression. I like it. And I think he's going to be a solid pickup in the second round. Maybe look for like a team like maybe like Portland to pick him up where, they might be looking to add to their center depth. So just a team that's kind of scarce on the center margins and stuff like that. I guess Justin Edwards is another one. I think, he's pretty cool. Kentucky freshman, 20 years old, 6'8", 203. He's got a lot of potential as well. Obviously, you can't really talk about this draft without talking about Bronny James. I think he's not necessarily like a standout or anything, but I think he's more so a story to watch. Because I think it could impact a couple of things, later down the line. But that's about it for me, honestly. If you want me to be honest, maybe like Jalen Bridges or something like that.
Yeah.
He's another guy, but I think there's a lot of seniors in this draft that will be instant impact players, whether they be drafted in the first or second round. And those guys will play like immediately, I think, and impact some teams that, are contenders.
Yeah. I guess I'll add in a couple, right? Like Enrique Freeman, out of Akron, right? 5-year guy. Got some good measurements, right? He's a good rebounder, right? Solid defender. But like you said, there's, we don't necessarily know. I think Dylan Jones is another one, right? 6'5", big body dude. Very good rebounder, right, at the collegiate level, right? He averaged 10 rebounds a game as a 6'5" guy, which is pretty impressive. Super long arms as well. Maybe THT-ish. I don't know.
Little bit.
Yeah, which is intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, like you said, there's a lot of seniors. And again, seniors, nothing wrong with that, right? Those are guys that can help out teams. But I think the second round is I'm gonna be really intrigued by what teams do in the second round, because we saw 2 seasons ago, right, the Nuggets title year, right? We saw a bunch of teams move second round picks, right, basically to bring in guys at the deadline, right? But is it possible that we might see, more teams like actually use their second round picks and value them this year, right? Like to actually take guys in the second round, maybe to help teams out. Because again, with the new CBA, we're in uncharted territory. So, these are our thoughts. Obviously, again, things could change right up to the last minute, right? A guy that we thought goes, would go 4 or 5 could go 1. Who the heck knows? But either way, right? This is the first round of our mock draft.
Yep.
Yeah. So now news and rumors, right, around the association. So there's some interesting stuff, right? Obviously, a lot of it, kind of pertains to, things like free agency, right? Maybe some trades going on. But some interesting stuff kind of came out about Paul George, right? And about, according to Mark Stein, that it's possible that he may opt into his player option and then maybe just seek a trade, and go elsewhere, right, from the Clippers, right? They mentioned the Knicks. I believe the Warriors were also mentioned as well. What do we think about this, right? Because I think we were kind of operating under the assumption of that he probably just opts out and just re-signs with the Clippers, right? Maybe there's a chance he went to Philly. But, do you think that it's possible that, well, not that it's possible, because, I guess anything's possible, but, like, do you still anticipate that he returns to the Clippers? I guess is probably the bigger question.
I think he's going to return to the Clippers. I don't think the Clippers are going to let him go that easy or anything like that. And I feel like he has value. It's just a matter of, is it going to be winning value? We haven't really seen that in a very long time from him, because I think he's, a super rare talent. It's just a matter of, where is he going to fit in if it's not the Clippers, right? Because I don't think New York makes a whole lot of sense in terms of what they're building and what their identity is. The Warriors, I think, has piqued my interest, but how in the world are they going to do that? What kind of trade are we going to be looking at? Like, what would the package be for this guy? Because I feel like the Clippers would want a substantial amount of things, and do the Warriors have that to give up? And it's like, maybe Paul George could be like the Julius Randle replacement. But even then, I still don't feel like he fits their identity. I'm just not sold on all this Paul George movement. I feel like if he's going to go anywhere, he's either going to, he's going to sign. Like, it's not going to, I don't feel like he's going to be traded. I feel like it's going to be more so of like I'm signing somewhere else kind of thing. I don't know. That's just me though.
Right. So another guy, KCP, right? Just, there's also been kind of stuff about him, right? That, he may opt out. Maybe he signs an extension with the Nuggets, but there's also some teams that are chasing him, right? Say like Philadelphia, and others as well. I guess that's another guy where, do we expect him to be back with the Nuggets, or do we think that a team may pay him more than what the Nuggets could give him? Because I don't know. Because I feel like, I feel like I'd be a little surprised if he got like 25 million a year or something like that. Mm-hmm. Not that he's not worth it, but I just feel like that, I feel like I'd be a little bit surprised if a team was like, like say if you're Philly and it's like, well, we didn't get Paul George, but we're going to give KCP like 25 million a year, right? And it's not that he's, bad or anything, because he can certainly help out Philly. He fits well. I just don't necessarily know if that's what Philly is actually going to do, or is it kind of just like noise, right? Versus like, is it maybe just more likely that he just just stays in Denver. But with Denver, obviously, assuming you pay him, you're not going to have much flexibility to really do anything else. But, losing him would be worse because you can't really replace him if he's gone unless you're just like, well, we have Christian Brown, so let's just move him in there. It's like, I don't know if he's ready for that just yet.
Yeah, I feel like Denver has a lot to lose if they do end up, losing KCP. If you look at his numbers, they're pretty much identical from last year or 2023, the championship year for them. So, I think he's not going to field a whole lot of offers. I feel like I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of teams that are after him just because I feel like Denver is going to, they're going to offer him the money, obviously. But if it's a team like Philly, do they really bite on that? I don't know. Because he's 10 years into his career.
Right.
He's 31, so he's aging. But like I said, the numbers, there's no significant drop off. I don't know. I just feel like he's going to just re-sign with Denver. I just don't see him leaving a winning situation to go to a potential winning situation, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And because the role is basically the same. It would just be, I guess it would just, the real defining factor is the money, right? Because obviously if Philly is willing to give him more, then he's gone. Right. But,
sure.
Is Philly actually going to give him that much?
I don't see
Or are
him
they just going to kind of focus on building out?
I don't think his value is super high. I don't know.
Right. I mean, I feel like it could be. I just don't know if it's $25 million a year.
No,
I could be
I don't
wrong,
think it's
though.
overpay. No.
Yeah, because I just feel like if you're Philly, that's a good chunk of your cap. I mean, then you probably have 10-ish million. I guess you'd also have the exception as well. But I mean, that would basically be 3 guys, which I guess would be fine. But that would basically mean KCP is your most expensive acquisition, and I don't necessarily know if that makes a whole lot of sense. I feel like you might just want to spread it out at that point.
Yeah, I don't like that.
According to Yahoo Sports, Kings most likely Levine suitor, right? So this is Jake Fisher. He believes that the Philly thing is more so a backup option, right? Which I guess because it kind of makes sense because if you're the Sixers, there's no rush to use your cap space because you don't have to use it yet. Maybe they make a trade. We'll see. But, the Kings one, just kind of interesting, right? Because obviously, assuming Sacramento does that, right, it's probably some combination of, Barnes, Herter, something like that. And I guess, if you're Chicago, that's not horrible. I mean, it's not great, but, at the same time, it's better than just keeping him and not doing anything. Because if you're the Bulls, it's time to rebuild. But, I guess also if you're the Kings, does that make sense? It's a talent upgrade for sure. And it's an additional, perimeter scorer guy. So I guess in theory, that's another guy that you could, that could play next to Sabonis. So you don't have to have as much pressure on him. Right. Which is nice. But, I guess also at the same time, is that the right move? Right. Because it's definitely a talent upgrade for sure. Right. He's a better player. But is that really what the Kings need?
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of that one. Like you said, I think it is time for the Bulls to kickstart this long overdue rebuild, but I don't know. I just don't know how I feel about the fit though, if you want me to be honest. That's just a weird one to me.
Right. And then, according to Shams Charania, right on the Pat McAfee show, he said, the teams around the league expect, the Hawks to be, shopping DeJounte Murray, right? Obviously, he's mentioned, people have mentioned that, Mark Stein has said either Young or Murray, right? I don't think it'll be both, right? But at the same time, which one do you think is the more likely one to be moved? I guess first off.
I mean, I would move on from DeJounte Murray first, if you want me to be honest, because I think Trae Young is just a better player, offensively, obviously. But it wouldn't surprise me if Trae asks out. That's what it's all contingent on is does Trae want out? And are they going to grant him that wish? That's what I would kind of be more concerned with. But the backcourt needs to be broken up. It's not going to work. It's never going to work. So one of them needs to be gone. It's just a matter of which one, when, and where.
And then I guess if it's DeJounte Murray, what teams make the most sense, for him, right? Because presumably if he's moved, he goes back to point guard, as opposed to playing the 2 or whatever it is in Atlanta.
Go back to San Antonio. Go to LA. It's just a matter of what the heck is the package going to be. That's what I'm kind of confused about.
Yeah, because for the Lakers, we know, that was something that was discussed at the deadline, and then it never ended up coming to fruition because it sounded like the Hawks want Austin and the Lakers don't want to give up Austin. And then that's where I think, you kind of, like for me, if it was Murray and an additional thing, then I would be like, yeah, that's fine. Because I feel like if you bring in Murray, I think you would want him to play next to Austin. Because then who's the guy that you elevate into the starting 2-guard spot?
Yeah.
But then
that's the key.
But then it's like, Trae Young, what happens with him if he were to be moved? We don't know. We've heard some teams, but I don't feel like we've heard as many this is a team that wants to trade for Trae Young as much as we've heard Murray. I guess you've heard Lakers as well, but who else?
Yeah, with Trae Young, there's been nothing concrete.
Contract.
Yeah, there's been nothing concrete. It's the same thing as Zach LaVine. People don't want to take on
Right.
that contract because you're also going to end up giving up a lot as well to match that and make it, economically fair or whatever the case may be. And it's just a tough situation because, you're maybe asking a little bit too much for, DeJounte Murray, but then you've already given Trae Young the contract. So, you're kind of stuck. And I think the only way they get out of this is if they lower their value on DeJounte Murray, which would basically mean biting the bullet and taking the L.
That would be like admitting
do.
that. Yeah, it'd be admitting the trade didn't work and that you're going to have to sell lower than what you gave up.
Exactly.
Because they gave up. I mean, they didn't give up anything in terms of players, but they gave up multiple firsts,
which has screwed them
including
over.
including a couple of unprotected ones. And if you're not a great team in the next few seasons, then that's where it's going to get really dicey.
Yep.
Another guy, right, for Atlanta that could be on the move, Clint Capella, right? We've already talked about that, which makes sense, right? The number one pick's available, right? Probably doesn't factor into the future plans. Probably would be better off on another team, right? He's 30 years old. Not quite as good as he used to be, right? But he can still rebound. He can still, block shots. He could probably be fine for a team. And, his contract isn't really that bad, right? It's like $20 million or whatever. I think it's an expiring. So that's another factor as well. And we know there's a lot of teams that could use a center. It's just a matter of how much are they willing to give up. Probably not. You probably don't have to give up as much for Trae Young or Murray as you do for Capella, right? Capella's not going to ask for as much, back if you're Atlanta. But, there's probably more teams that he might be able to fit into.
Yeah, I'd say OKC, go and grab him because I think people forget, what his impact was in his glory days, with Houston. He was awesome in terms of, his ability to defend, rebound, all that stuff. And then it kind of transitioned to Atlanta. Just didn't work out. But I think he would kind of thrive in a role, being the backup center for Oklahoma City.
Yeah, exactly. According to Mark Stein, the Spurs might be eyeing the Hawks' number one pick. So,
I don't buy it.
It's another scenario where, a lot of stuff going on about the mobility of that pick. Again, I don't necessarily know if that's what's going to happen. I'd be curious to see what the Spurs would give up in order to get the number one pick. But, again, it'd be interesting because obviously then you can kind of take whoever you want, if you're the Spurs. But, I guess who's the guy at number one where if you're the Spurs, you're like, we need to trade up to get this guy?
Risa Share. That's what I would think.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's, he's the standout, potential standout, or I think he's the one in terms of what San Antonio thinks is the best player in the draft and the best player for them. I would just think that, Risa Share, I think Risa Share is going number one. That's where I had him mocked. But the issue is I would think that Atlanta's not moving off of that number one pick. I just don't see it. I really don't see them moving off of that pick. I see teams like Washington, Houston. I see those kinds of teams moving on from their pick and trading back and getting multiple first round picks in this draft, more so than Atlanta. I just don't buy that one because I think Atlanta is looking to improve as much as they can, especially if they're going to be moving DeJounte Murray or Trae Young or Clint Capella. Somebody's getting moved. So that's kind of where it's I don't buy that they're moving off that number one pick.
Yeah, same. DeMar DeRozan, according to Mark Stein, he could be possibly a guy that may actually be more available than people expected, right? So obviously, he's got a couple options, right? Chicago could re-sign him, bring him back, and then he just, probably stays there. Or he could leave. Now, again, the thing is that there's not a whole lot of teams that have cap space. So, assuming if he wants to leave Chicago and go to a contender, well, there's not a whole lot of options there. And then at the same time, the teams that have cap space, are they going to use it on him? I don't know, right? Like, is Philly going to use all their cap space to bring in DeMar DeRozan? I don't know.
That wouldn't even be a winning move, in my opinion. Like,
right.
I don't
Is
think.
Detroit?
I don't know.
Yeah, is Detroit going to give him, a good chunk of their cap? Is Charlotte? Like, I don't know. Like, that's the main issue where there's not a whole lot of teams with cap. Philly, I guess, is the best team with cap space other than OKC. But I don't think he would go to OKC either. Like, I don't think they need, what he does. I think, they need, positional size and other things like that. But that's a guy where I feel like he's still good enough that he can help, obviously, a lot of teams. I just don't necessarily know how much he goes for. And whatever he goes for, like, what teams actually are going to give him that.
Yeah, it's just the market is bad. It's not that he's a bad player by any means. It's just his market is just horrible because, like you said, look at the teams that have the cap space. They either don't fit his window of what he wants to do in his career, or they just don't fit his identity as a player. And that's kind of unfortunate because we already know he's a good player. So I just don't think that he fits in any like these free agency things. So I think he might be stuck in Chicago, unfortunately.
Yeah. We'll see. And then last but not least, the Wizards and Knicks, Mitchell Robinson. How do we feel about that as the Wizards fan? Possibly.
I mean, it's interesting. I just don't know what they're trying to give up or whatever. He's kind of a injury guy. That's kind of why I'm a little bit conscious about it. But if we can get a draft pick or something like that out of it for the future, I'm on board for that. It also depends on what we're going to give up. But yeah, if it's like because I don't know because his contract isn't horrible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
no, not at all.
Yeah, so like if it's a friendly contract, I'm fine with that. Me personally, I prefer to take on horrible contracts and get picks and and stuff like that in exchange. But I don't have a problem with it because at the end of the day, we're not winning games anyway. So at this point, it really doesn't matter.
Makes $14 million next season and then $13 million the year after that. So that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it just does make sense because I think they do want to maybe build an identity because who knows? He could be like the Gafford replacement where it's like, yeah, Gafford looked really good on the Wizards. It's just unfortunately he was on the Wizards, so he didn't get a lot of eyes on him. So I think if Mitchell Robinson comes here and kind of replicates that, maybe they bring their 28 defensive rank up a little bit, Who knows?
But I guess the thing is that if Sarr's still there and they take him, then they probably wouldn't end up trading for Robinson, I guess, right?
Exactly. That's why I'm kind of questioning it, where it's like, yeah, like if you don't get Sarr, all right, cool, draft him or trade him. But I don't know. I personally go with the young guy there.
Yeah, I think the bigger story here is probably that the Knicks would be, might be interested in moving on from Robinson, but I think some of that also probably depends on what happens with Hartenstein.
Yeah.
Because if he resigns, then there's not, I guess, quite as big of a need to move him.
Right.
But, I guess if Hartenstein leaves, you don't have another center.
No, you're stuck with Mitchell Robinson. So you'd have to draft a center, which is what we might.
Right, yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess if Hartenstein resigns, then yeah, you would probably be okay with moving Robinson for somebody else. It's not that he's bad. It's just obviously it's like he gets hurt a lot. He can block shots and rebound well, but maybe if you're, like the Knicks may want a different type of big after Hartenstein, because he had a great season. So it seems like he's pretty much taken the starting center spot from Robinson. And so Robinson may be more, more movable at this point than he might have been, like, say, a few years ago, where it's like they wouldn't have been interested in trading him at all because it felt like he had a lot of potential. Whereas now with Hartenstein, he's, now he's better. Yeah. So you might be okay with moving on from Robinson if you bring back Hartenstein, which it sounds like that's what a lot of people expect. But, of course, things could change.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on our mock drafts. Did you like them? Did you not like them? Do you agree? Do you not agree? Are there any picks that, maybe you think should be there that we didn't have there? So let us know that. Obviously, as we already mentioned, we're going to be doing a live stream, during both rounds of the draft, right? So, check that out. Come join us. As you've already mentioned, right, we're going to do that with Miami Heat Network, right? Permitting, obviously. And again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you comment, we'll read it on the next video. So either we'll see you on the next live stream or we'll see you Monday.